The 5-second rule is extraordinary, but it doesn't address what I believe is everybody's fundamental issue. And everybody's fundamental issue is that you either hate yourself or you do nothing but judge yourself. And this habit of relentless self-criticism and relentless self-rejection is the reason why you're unhappy. It's the reason why you're never satisfied. It's the reason why you can't take a compliment and why you're uncomfortable feeling celebrated. And it all comes down to the fact that when you stand in front of the mirror every single morning, you have this really subtle way that's not so subtle of starting your day by rejecting yourself. And I'm going to unpack this because it's unbelievably powerful when you start to truly understand this. Because if you can't look in the mirror and authentically see a human being that you respect, that you encourage, that you like, that you're cheering for, I'm going to even leave love off the table because I think that is so unattainable for where people are right now. Let's just go with, can you accept yourself? Can you like yourself? Can you see a person that's worthy of support, worthy of your encouragement? Can we just start with that baseline? Because for my research, the average person cannot. From my research, 50% of men and women do not or cannot look at themselves in the mirror because they are either disgusted by the person they see or they are disappointed by them. And for those of us that can look in the mirror, we're still rejecting ourselves because we focus on what we don't like, or we start to mindlessly think about all the things that we haven't done right or that we didn't do yet. You know, on this particular morning, April 2020, I'm overwhelmed by my life. I drag myself into the bathroom. I immediately see my reflection and I'm like, oh, God, you look like hell. Yeah. I start ticking off all the things, the saggy neck, one boob lower than the other, like, you know, how exhausted I look, the gray hair coming in, how old I'm starting to seem. Yeah. And then the mind, once it goes negative, keeps going in that direction unless you're 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, not thinking about that. But so my mind's like going down the drain. I'm like, why'd I get up so late? I got a Zoom call in 8 minutes. God, you didn't even, text him back yet. And the dog still needs to be. And I'm like, the beat down, the boom, boom, boom starts. And, I don't know what came over me. But that morning standing there, could not think of a thing to say. And here's the important part. When you feel like shit, when you're overwhelmed by your life, you're not going to believe a pep talk anyway. Because it doesn't match how you feel. And so for whatever reason, I literally just raised my hand and I high-fived the woman that I saw in the mirror because she looked like she needed a high five. She looked like she needed somebody to say, it's going to be okay. You can do this. Get out there. And, from that very first one, it wasn't like lightning came crashing through the ceiling and, stuck me in the head. That's not what happened. But there's definitely a switch inside each and every one of us. Yeah. So think about the walls here. Yeah. Even when the lights are off, there's electricity in these walls. Even during your worst moments, there is vitality ripping through your veins. There is an electrical life force within you. And life can turn that switch off, but it's still there. There was something about this high five action that felt like a flip, like the switch flipped on, and all of a sudden the energy could connect back and something inside me turned on. Now, that first morning, I didn't go, yeah, that's not what happened. I just felt this sort of shift to, all right, you got a roof over your head, your family's healthy, you've saved money. It's not that bad. Yeah. Get out there. I didn't even think those things. It was more like the electricity, the energy in me, this vitality kind of kicked in. But it was the second morning where the profound nature of what I was stepping into really kicked in. So I wake up, anxiety, ankles right up the legs, feel like the rush of, oh God, something's wrong. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, I get out of bed. I start walking to the bathroom. And it's as I'm walking to the bathroom, I'm not even in there yet, that I feel something I have never felt in my entire adult life. And it's this. You know, when you're about to go to a cafe and you're going to meet somebody you're really excited to meet, right?
Yeah.
Or somebody you really love, you're going to see them.
Yeah.
What do you feel right as you're about to walk in the cafe?
You're excited. You're upbeat. You're anticipating something good happening.
Yeah. I actually realized I was feeling that way about seeing myself.
Yeah.
Now, I'm 53 this year. I don't think until that morning in April 2020, I had ever had an experience as an adult of being excited to see the human being Mel Robbins. I've been excited to see an outfit or a haircut or the way new eyeshadow might look. But the human being? The way our kids, when they're really, really little, just love the sight of themselves? This unconditional support and celebration that's hardwired in your DNA when you're born?
Yeah.
And so as I rounded the corner that second morning, that's when the profound nature of this started to really hit me. And I stood there and I stared at the woman in the mirror. And I realized I don't think I've ever asked myself the question, what does she need from me today? I've never joined in partnership with myself. I have been so busy trying to get shit done, trying to make sure people like me, trying to make sure the bills are paid, trying to make sure everybody else is okay, trying to do all this stuff that is the stuff of our lives, that I have forgotten about the most important person, and that is myself. And again, I'm going to go back to a point that we have been talking about kind of in various ways, which is we all know that we're supposed to love ourselves. We all know that we're supposed to be kind to ourselves. You can read a quote on Instagram. You should talk to yourself like your best friend. The problem is how. You read a quote like that, you're like, no shit, Sherlock. How do I do it? I mean, like, what? Seriously? Right? How do you do that? I don't know. I've been beating the shit out of myself for years. How do I stop doing it? I don't know. And, here's the thing. Like, logically, we know it's stupid because if beating yourself up, being hard on yourself, rejecting yourself, trashing yourself, if it actually worked, we'd all be millionaires. We'd have rock star bodies. We'd have the best marriages on the planet. We'd never have to work a day in our life. We'd be on a beach somewhere. Like, it would work.
Yeah.
But instead, we have these patterns of thinking and small patterns of behavior, like not looking in the mirror at yourself is a form of rejecting yourself. Picking yourself apart is a habit of rejecting yourself. And so when you start your day like that, which you do, and then you go out into the world having rejected your very being, this is the reason why you are so thirsty for everybody else's validation. This is the reason why you are seeking your worth in the money that you make, in the car that you drive, in the downloads that you get, in the likes that you have, in the neighborhood that you live in. You think your worth is outside of you. And I'm here to tell you the secret to your fucking life is grab that worth and bring it back home. Start practicing a physical habit, an action that demonstrates to your brain that you respect yourself, that you believe that you're worthy, that you deserve forgiveness, that you deserve encouragement, that you believe in you. And as you start to practice the physical action, the universal symbol for I got you, I love you, I celebrate you, I see you, I believe in you. When you practice this physical action, the Neuro Association that is already in your brain with the high five to yourself in the mirror takes over. It's insane how this works. The science is mind-blowing. I think this is 1,000 times more powerful than the high five habit because it cuts down to the core of who you are.
You think it's more powerful than the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 habit?
Hell yes, I do. Hell yes, because the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a tool that will push you to take action. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is a tool you use to cut off the worries that trigger anxiety. 54321 is a tool that you use to create a moment of objectivity and control when you're normally triggered so you can consciously choose a different response.
Yeah.
The high five habit goes all the way down to the core of who you are and how you treat yourself. And when you become a human being who has compassion for yourself, who likes you, it won't matter what happens out there.
Yeah.
Because everything in here is healed and taken care of. And so, like, somebody can say to me, I don't love you anymore. I don't like you. It'll sting, but it doesn't change the fact that I still like myself. Because I practice and demonstrate it. That's the difference.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the hidden magic in the high five habits is, because I've been trying it the last few days, right?
And what did you experience?
It is powerful because...
Well, walk us through. Like you're
You
standing
have
at
to-
your bathroom sink.
Yeah,
And walk us through your experience.
Well, first of all, you have to take a pause from your life. Whatever you were going to do, it requires an intentional pause to go, no, I'm going to now do this action for myself. And I've got to say, before I tell you how it went, I think it would have been very different for me a few years ago because I feel self-compassion, not seeking your worth from outside, from other people, from download numbers, likes, what people say about you, which was a huge part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that having put a lot of that to bed now and really feeling that I actually like the person I see in the mirror these days. So I kind of feel 5 years ago, I would have had a different experience with it, but it was still powerful because you are just looking at yourself and you're putting your hand on the mirror. And I think what it is, it's just that pause, that moment of seeing me. Like you are seeing yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I don't know, obviously as a guy, what do? We're often looking in the mirror. We might be looking at our beard as we're shaving, right?
Yeah.
But you're not looking at your eyes,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're just looking at, I need to shave. I missed a bit here. Let me get rid of that. And then you crack on, right? Or you look at your face and your hair, but you're not really looking at yourself.
Right.
You're seeing your silhouette. You are seeing yourself, but you're not seeing yourself, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yeah.
And that's what I think was really powerful, was that it's just another, I feel it's just another tool now, which is going to take me all of 2 seconds, if that's 5 seconds tops. It's not as if I don't have time to add that in. There's no harm in adding it in. And frankly, I like adding it in. It makes me feel good. It's like, and I think it's what you say, it's the action.
Yeah.
You don't have to say anything if you're not in the mood to say
I don't
anything.
want you to say anything, actually. And the reason why is the Neuro Association. So,
What do you mean by that?
well, here's what I mean by that. So, when you high five someone else, what does the action of a high five communicate?
It's just a universal symbol of you got this, I see you, you're great, we can do this. It depends on the situation, but it's a good feeling. It's a mutual sort of validation type experience.
Tell me about the London Marathon and getting high fives.
Oh, I mean,
What did a stranger's high five mean to you?
It just gave you, and that's the key, it's strangers, right? You don't know them and they're looking at you and you're looking at them, or maybe you're not even looking at them. You just went through, you give a high five. It's like you've taken a shot of feel goods. It's validation. It's like, hey, you know what? We're in this together. You're standing at the side cheering, I'm running. But at that moment, it was like common humanity. It was like, there was no animosity. And actually, this kind of one of my big learnings from the London Marathon actually was, and it relates to this, I think, is that that's kind of who we are. Like in what is considered a very divided world at the moment, I went and did the London Marathon and all I saw was love, strangers giving love to other people that they didn't know, right? And how did they give that love? Through cheering, but more often than not, with a high five.
Correct. It is a universal symbol of encouragement, of love, of celebration. And the Neuro Association, whether you live in a culture where you've been high-fived or not, the Neuro Association is still there because you have seen them in sport.
Yeah.
You've seen them in marathons. You've seen teachers give them to kids. So your brain has a lifetime of programming in your subconscious that is triggered by this action. It is neurologically impossible to high-five yourself and think, you're a loser, you failed, I don't like your face. Your brain will not allow you to do it because the Neuro Association is so entrenched. It has only ever meant, I celebrate you, I see you, I got you, keep going, you got this, I'm behind you.
As you say that, Mel, it makes me think of gratitude, because when we are feeling grateful, we can't feel down, we can't feel anxious, we can't feel annoyed with ourselves. And in some ways, this is kind of gratitude for ourselves.
Correct. Because the thing about gratitude, which obviously has tremendous, demonstrated, proven benefits in your life, most of us are grateful for things outside of us.
Yeah.
What I'm teaching the world to do is to unlock Neuro Association in your mind and in your nervous system and aim it back at yourself. And use this simple habit to interrupt the critic, to break the default loops in your mind associated with judgment, shame, criticism, hatred for self, and to replace it with a new default setting of seeing yourself the way you see your child, which is love. Yeah. Like, my kids do stuff that piss me off all the time. And I can be upset with them or disappointed with them, but I never stop loving them.
Yeah.
And there is something that has happened to each and every one of us that as life's pains and heartaches and disappointments and setbacks sort of stack up, we stop loving ourselves. We start judging ourselves more. We start condemning ourselves more. We start rejecting ourselves more. We start trying to seek somebody else's love and approval in order to fill up this well inside of us that we've been digging because we've been rejecting ourselves. And so, it's so powerful because the action alone is what communicates it. If you're looking at yourself and you raise your hand on your hardest days, what the high five says is not, yeah, I'm amazing. Like, this is not going to turn you into a narcissist. This is grounded in compassion.
Yeah.
This is basically saying, I see you. You're right. This is hard. And you know what? You can do this. And I'm going to be here. And I've got your back. And when you send yourself into your day with that physical action, it leaves an imprint in your mind and spirit. Now, there's a couple reasons why. I don't even write about this part in the book because I didn't know this until I started doing podcasts for the book.
Yeah.
So Dr. Amen told me, who's, one of the leading experts in the brain, that one of the reasons why you feel better when you do it, no matter how terrible of a morning it is because your brain has always given you dopamine when somebody else high-fives you.
Yeah.
So these sorts of gestures are rewarded in the brain. So when you simply high-five yourself, your brain doesn't distinguish between me high-fiving me and me high-fiving you. It just sees, oh, I know what that is. Drip, dopamine. Oh, I believe in that person. The second thing that happens is that your body is hardwired for celebratory energy. This is that electricity that's in the walls that has a switch that you can turn on and off. And so, for example, when you cross the finish line of the London Marathon, what do you instinctively do?
High five someone.
Yeah, and raise your hands, right? When your favorite team scores, raise your hands. When you yell surprise at a birthday party, you raise your hands. When you say hello, you raise your arm. When you go to high five somebody, you raise your arms.
Yeah.
When you hug somebody, you raise your arms. This is wired through your entire body. And normally we give that celebratory energy to other people or things.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you, when you high five yourself, you flip the switch. You flip the switch and give yourself a little bit of that vitality that's coursing through you to help you move into your day.
Yeah, I see it as almost like It is about the high five, but it's not in many ways as well, because it's like if you're going down a road and the high five to yourself sets you off on a different path for the rest of that day compared to had you not done it, right?
1,000% right. So let's just use a great example that everybody can latch onto. Sport.
Yeah.
So if a team is about to play the championship in the league, right?
Yeah.
And they're the underdogs. What is the best way to send the team into that game? Is it to beat them down? Oh, you did a terrible job on the London Marathon. You're going to faceplant in New York. Oh, my God. And I saw your split times. We're fucked. No, that's not the best way to do it.
But that's what we do to ourselves.
Correct. Correct. And so I'm here to say you don't have to say anything because you're not going to believe it. So we're going to cheat this. We're going to circuit your feelings.
You're bypassing
Correct.
words. It's like when you take like this ridiculous example, but it's like when you take a B12 supplement, but you take it sublingually, so it dissolves. So you bypass having to go into the gut, through the liver, and then you get it straight in.
Correct.
And it's got that feel to me.
1,000%. And so you send yourself into the game of life with that sort of optimism, with that resilience, with that compassion. And, look, some days you're going to laugh. Some days you might cry. People report some days you're going to just feel a little bit better. And some days you're going to high five yourself and laugh out loud from the dopamine and walk into your boss's office and ask for that raise or quit. Because you're going to remember that no matter what, you're going to be okay. You're going to remember that no matter what, you got your own back. You're going to remember that it doesn't matter if nobody says great job at that presentation that you worked on, because you can walk into the bathroom, as people have written to us, having practiced this. Hey, I did a presentation at work. Nobody said a damn word. The old me would have walked into my cube and cried and thought I was getting fired. I knew I did a good job. I walked into the bathroom and high-fived myself. Your kids can stick this in their back pocket. And it's a way to reset yourself when you start going down that negative road. And why is this important? It's important because the high five is not going to remove poverty. It's not going to remove discrimination. It's not going to remove diabetes. It's not going to remove the fact that somebody just said they want to divorce you. It's not going to remove all of the trauma. It doesn't change those things. It changes you.
Yeah.
And it changes your relationship with yourself and your ability to believe that through your actions and your attitude, you can move the needle on those things.
Yeah, I love that last point, Mel, because the similarities between the way you talk about this and the way I've been talking about certain behaviors and 5-minute habits for years, they are so connected. And one of the things I often say, and I want to just acknowledge you for what you just said, it's not going to change your life situation. If you're in poverty, you're still going to be in poverty, but you're going to be a different person. You're going to be better able to face the stresses that are in your life.
Yes.
And I think this is such an important point, right? Because I have said this before on the show, but I always think it's worth reiterating that a lot of people feel that self-help or wellness is the preserve of the wealthy and the middle classes. But actually, habits like this, yes, they'll help someone who's got a ton of money in their bank accounts, because a lot of people like that are racked with self-doubt on the inside as well. But it's also going to help someone who is in poverty, or a single mum who's working 2 jobs and has got 3 kids and is really struggling. That little micro moment each morning where she sees herself in the mirror, she signals to her brain that she is worthy, that actually she's a human being with real feelings, and for all her qualities and all her, all the great things that she's doing, that has power, right?
Oh my God,
it is
amazing
free.
power.
It is free. There's not a single person pretty much who is listening to this or watching this right now who couldn't just either pause or at the end go, all right, let me, I'm convinced, Mel. Like, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to give this a go.
Yeah. Well, first of all, don't rush it. Don't rush it. So don't go into the bathroom and slap the mirror and be like, I didn't feel anything. I want you to, again, as you so rightly put, take a minute and just look at yourself, because for most people, that's the hardest part. I mentioned that, I get smarter and I learn so much from every comment and people that write their stories in. And one person, Allison Bird, a friend of mine, who made my ability to explain the depth of this so much deeper, because she said one thing to me when she tried it before the book came out. She said, I think it's working. I feel energized. I said, but what surprised me, Mel? I said, what? She goes, the resistance. I said, the resistance? What are you talking about? She's like, oh, first couple days I did this, I stood in front of that mirror and there was something in me that's like, I couldn't even raise my hand. There was this resistance. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And so I, of course, put something out. Hey, to the 700,000 people on the newsletter list, anybody trying this and feel any resistance? We write to everybody that's in our little test group. Anybody feel, holy cow. It turns out that most people do not have an immediate positive, oh, I'm doing this reaction. Most people have massive resistance to even trying it. And I want to explain why, because this is extraordinarily sad. And it also is an enormous opportunity for growth, because I believe, based on having 136,000 people go through a 5-day challenge online that we're monitoring in an app from 91 countries and seeing what they're reporting, I know that this takes 5 days to work. 5 days before you have an enormous breakthrough in how you see and relate to yourself. 5 days before the chemical, physiological, neurological, physical, and psychological change starts to go, holy cow, this is crazy. This works like this. And so the resistance comes from self-judgment and self-condemnation. And I'm going to tell you a story to drive this home. For people who stand in the bathroom mirror when they try the high five habit and they feel this resistance in their body, first of all, let me say, it's really normal to think this is weird, because it is, okay? It just sounds so cheesy. For those of us that grew up with Saturday Night Live, you're going to think of Stuart Smiley. I'm nice, people like me, that skit they used to do about the guy who talked to himself in the mirror. You're going to stand there and go, seriously, Dr. Chatterjee and Mel Robbins, you two have lost your mind. But okay. If it's weird as you do it, that's a sign it's working.
Yeah.
So Dr. Leaf told me, oh, well, that's what it feels like when a new neural pathway is getting plowed. So if it feels weird, good, because we're teaching you to do the opposite of criticizing yourself. Yeah. But the resistance is something else. The resistance is the fact that every morning as you start your day, you drag your entire past into the bathroom with you. And if you're somebody who has experienced trauma or been abused or abandoned or neglected or grew up with chaos and addiction, or you've been the victim of a crime, or you're constantly having to deal with discrimination or violence, all stuff that you're not responsible for. There are a lot of people who take all of that from their past, and when they look at themselves, they see somebody who's damaged. They see somebody who's unworthy. They see somebody who is unlovable because of those things. And what the high five starts to become when you do it is it becomes literally an act of defiance. It becomes an act of strength. It becomes a sign that I'm a survivor. It becomes permission to heal. It becomes this deep sense of feeling and knowing where you are and the fact that you have an extraordinary future despite all of the pain and suffering that you have endured and survived. And then there are people that bring everything they regret, all the shame, all the regret, so the cheating, the lying, the stealing, the hurt you've caused yourself or other people, the missed opportunities. And boy, did I get an unbelievable example of this in my own life. So, I was doing the high five habit myself. And during the early days of the pandemic, my husband had just been diagnosed with depression. And he's a super healthy guy. He is a certified Buddhist meditation instructor. He leads men's retreats called Soul Degree. He's a yoga instructor. He's wildly involved with our community and with our family. He's a super high functioning guy, but he's just felt heavy.
I've been a doctor for over 20 years. I've seen tens of thousands of patients, and I have to say that journaling is one of the most powerful habits I've seen with all of my patients. When people journal regularly, I see improvements in things like focus and productivity. I see improvements in their mental health, their decision-making, but also in their ability to make healthy change in their life. And the reason is because journaling helps you get to know yourself better. If you ask yourself the right questions, you'll get the right answers. And I've created my very own journal called the 3-Question Journal. In that journal are 3 of the most powerful questions I believe that you can ask yourself each morning and each evening. Now, these are questions that are tried and tested with my patients over the past 2 decades. These are busy people with busy lives. And the reason I've created this journal is to help people with a very simple practice that doesn't take any more than 5 minutes that can immediately start to have a huge impact. Now, there's many ways to journal. You have to find the right method that works for you. But if you're interested in trying something new this year, I think the 3-Question Journal that I've created is very, very powerful. It's simple, it takes minutes to do, and I genuinely believe it will transform your life.
There's been like a cloud there, like a heaviness to him, like there's no light between his eyes. And so thankfully, his therapist finally got him to go see a psychopharmacologist and somebody to do the advanced testing. They're like, dude, you have dysthymia. You have like really long-term depression. Like, you're lucky you've been doing all this stuff because it's kept you alive. And I turned to him at one point. I've been doing this for a couple weeks rather. And I'm like, I know I'm not your doctor, and I know I'm not an expert in your mental health, but I really think you should try this high five thing. I really think it's going to help you with this depression. He's like, I'm not high five. It is the stupidest thing. I don't care what you're doing. No. And I'm like, okay, if you won't do it for yourself, would you just do it for me? Would you do it for 5 days? Because we're in the middle of researching this now. And I haven't even shared it with my audience yet. And I'm kind of like writing down in my journal what I'm feeling. And I've got a couple people on the team. Would you just do it for me? He's like, all right. So he kind of did the first one, like, are you happy? Typical spouse thing. Like, So he did it for 5 days. And then I asked him what he thought. And he said, you're on to something really big. And I said, why do you say that? And I had no idea how dark my husband's thoughts were. I had no idea how much he was condemning himself, how much shame he felt. I knew that he was struggling with depression. I had no idea that for the past 7 years, the man who has stood next to me at the bathroom sink next to me would look up at the mirror and see a person that he hated. He saw a person that had failed. He believed that since the restaurant business didn't work, and since it left us $800,000 in debt, and that his wife had to go out and make the money, that he was the world's worst father, the world's worst husband, and he has been condemning himself every day for 7 years. And the reason he thought the high five was stupid is because you only high five people you care about. You only high five people who are winning. And he, of all people, didn't deserve it. And for me, I knew that he was struggling with shame around the restaurant business. I knew he was struggling with the amount of debt that we had and the fact that, he had, the investors lost money. Like, for me, I had a totally different experience. I'm like, you guys worked at that for 8 years? You made your investors whole? Like, hello, entrepreneurship? Like, we wouldn't have the 5-second rule without it. Are you kidding? Like, woohoo, we're winning. This is amazing. Like, his business partner had the same, like, he was proud of what they built, proud of how hard they worked. Chris, for whatever reason, that was not his story. Yeah. His story was condemnation, regret, shame. He could only see a failure. And, what was wild about that is, I've for years talked Chris up. I've for years have told him how proud I am of him. He was the CFO of the business as the company was taking off. Yeah. Like, he owns half of it. Like, he's an integral part of everything. Yeah. He doesn't see it that way. And that's an important part. Yeah. Nobody can heal you. Nobody can change how you talk to yourself. This is an inside job. And so if you relate to how my husband feels, I want you to understand that what Chris said to me was that this high five and pushing through the resistance is an act of forgiveness. It's an act of healing. It's an act of support and compassion that allows you and shows you that you are giving yourself permission to feel good again, that you deserve to be happy, that you deserve and that you can continue to push on and go do better and be better and feel better. And that of all people, you're going to stop judging you.
That's the hidden power, because you had said to him, "You're great." He was in your company.
Our company, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
He owns it. He's with me.
Working, seeing the success, loving wife, loving kids. But it didn't matter, because that can only take you so far if the voice and the narrative that's playing in your own head is negative. For many people, it doesn't matter what the world around is telling them. They're not telling it to themselves. And therefore, the high five habit, it kind of breaks that, even if it's just for 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It is still that micro moment of compassion, of companionship.
Yes.
Right? Companionship with yourself.
Forgiveness, like all of it. All the stuff that we know we need to do, but we don't know how.
Yeah.
Because all we see is the stuff we regret. And so you weigh that in your mind and you start thinking about it. And this, what I love about this is not only the science, which is just like,
yeah. And it's all there in the book.
Oh, yeah.
You have,
and the studies are there and all of it.
There.
But I think the more powerful thing is that it's a simple action. And so let's go a layer deeper. Because the other thing that's happening is we can dip into behavioral activation therapy. So behavioral activation therapy, which, as you know, is just as effective and in some cases more effective than cognitive behavioral therapy. Behavioral activation therapy can be boiled down to simply this: act like the person you want to become. This is very different, by the way, than fake it till you make it. Act like the person you want to become is set an intention for the person you want to become. Like, you want to become a marathon runner? You need to start acting like one. You better buy some trainers. You better schedule some time with your wife to be able to go on a training run. You better watch some videos about how you taper up to the race. You better you better start acting like one. And so when you start to raise your hand and high five the human being in the mirror, you are acting like a person who cares about themselves. You're acting like a person who cheers for themselves. You're acting like a person who cares, empowers, respects, believes they're worthy, and your brain is watching. And so over time, as you repeat this, the structure in your brain starts to change in relation to how you feel about yourself. You stop thinking, believe it or not, about the failed restaurant, and you start remembering that you join in companionship and support in cheering this person forward.
Mindfulness is that process of staying in the present, so observing the thoughts that come into your mind, not trying to stop having any. A lot of people think that mindfulness is the ultimate in concentration. And if you're trying to be mindful of this glass, that the minute your attention is not on that glass, you've failed and you've got mindfulness wrong. And it's really not that. It's, your mind will wander to this thought and that thought, and it'll bring up stories and memories, and it'll hear the car outside or all that kind of thing. Mindfulness is noticing that your mind has gone somewhere and then guiding your attention back. So I love to think of mindfulness as a spotlight. So if you say, your mind is a theatre, and actors are, your thoughts. So different actors will come on stage. You can't control who's coming on stage or how long they're going to be there. But all you have is the spotlight.
Yeah.
And you can choose which ones you're going to focus on and for how long. And so mindfulness is that process of choosing what you're going to focus your attention on and allowing everything else to come and go. When we were trainees, and it's almost embarrassing now to even think that we behave like that. We were supposed to be so open-minded, but it really makes you think this is really difficult stuff to teach people, because it does give you that sense of, well, this sounds really weird and not helpful at all. And I absolutely had those judgments in the beginning, and it was only once I started using it that I had that, oh, right, yeah, this is helpful moment.
Did you, before that run, which you speak about in the book, where it really seemed to showcase to you what mindfulness was, had you planned before that run, right, okay, I'm going to have a mindful run now? Or was it just, I've gone for a run because that's how I unwind, and I get it. Oh, this is what they're talking. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so it was, exam season, stress was high, I had lots of work to do, but I just needed to get out the house. I'd been studying all day, I needed to get out of the house. So I went for this run, and it was a really long kind of gravel path, and I could feel myself, as I kind of started the jog, I kind of felt just so, I was just full of kind of, I should be doing this, I've got to do that when I get back, and I could feel the stress. And I thought, I'm just going to try. I'm just going to see if this will help. I'm just going to, try and be mindful. So I focused my mind on the sound of my feet on the gravel path, which is just that crunch sound, crunch sound, crunch sound as I went along. And my mind left that sound 1,000 times. I would think, that email I've got to reply to, or I need to do more revision on that, and I haven't added that to my, whatever. My mind went off to lots of stressful things. And each time I just brought it back. And because I was moving my body and I was outdoors and there was lots to bring me to the present, and the sound as well of my feet on the gravel, I was able to keep doing that. And I did that process maybe 1,000 times. I don't know how many.
During that run?
During the run, yeah. And then by the time I got back, I noticed that I had spent that run focusing on the present. That obviously there were these little moments where my mind would go off, but actually I had more time feeling calmer and focused on the here and now than I would have done if I'd had just gone through my to-do list while I was running. And that's when I thought, oh yes, I had these little micro moments of peace. And actually, mindfulness isn't about making you feel calm and peaceful. It's not a relaxation exercise. It's practicing that sort of mental muscle, if you like, to be able to choose which thoughts you're going to pay attention to and which ones you're going to let pass. And that is an incredible skill to be able to utilize.
I think it may well be the most important skill for any of us to learn, because I think a lot of us don't realize, I didn't for much of my life realize it, your brain is literally taking in so much information all the time, and actually what you're focusing on and what you're thinking about is just a small fraction, and your brain is actually helping choose for you what's important. But you can actually train that skill, and therefore, that thing about urge and action, there's a space between urge and action, and you can choose what you're going to do with that. I would say the thing that's helped me the most in my own, I was going to say mental well-being, but I'd almost say physical well-being as well, is this idea that between stressor and response is a space, and you can train so that space in your mind becomes bigger and bigger. Like these days, I really feel I feel I've got minutes to make a decision, even though it's microseconds, but I didn't 5 years ago. And I think it's through doing these regular practices. We're definitely going to get to some of these regular daily practices. What I found recently, like you on holiday at the sort of fear of heights and this scenario, you thought, oh, wow, I can do this differently here. I literally 2 weeks ago, because as we're having this conversation, my book's only just come out, I think 2 weeks ago, and I was due to go on BBC One Morning Live to talk about it. And I got up early and I was due on, I don't know, at 9 a.m. or something, and the taxi was due to pick me up at about 7. And, I'd showered, I'd shaved because I was going to be on telly. I thought actually I better shave for once. And the taxi had gone. And I thought, oh, I know the old Rongan would have in that moment, I would have made myself sick with thought, oh no, I'm going to be late, this is going to happen. And I was just totally calm. I thought, oh, well, I guess taxi's gone. I guess I'll just phone a couple of local firms, and if I can find someone, great. If not, well, so be it. And I know that sounds ridiculous. And to me, 5 years ago, that would sound ridiculous. But I see a lot of the tools that you're teaching people about, there can be a starting point where you then practice regularly, and then some of them start to become automatic. Do you know what I mean? It feels really good in a real life scenario. We go, oh, I've chosen a different response here. 5 years ago, I would have got stressed out by this. There's nothing wrong with that. But, oh, this stuff's working. Like in that moment, you just didn't allow yourself to make yourself sick with your thoughts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, lots of it becomes automatic. The thing that you do all the time, your brain will be brilliant at automating for you, right? And if you can just repeat it enough time, it will get easier to do. But also, it won't always happen. So, I mean, a lot of it is a toolbox. But imagine if you had a toolbox and there was, I don't know, some job to do, and you had to put a picture up, and you were kind of trying to do the tool with something else, and because it was quicker and easier than going to get your tools that you need. Sometimes you'll use the tools, and other times you will try and you won't. The situation won't feel like you have access to it, or maybe the stress will be higher, and maybe if I don't know, maybe if you were going to visit the Queen, you would have been more stressed, and that's okay. I think a lot of what I try to teach people is, it's not going to make you perfect in every situation, but the tools are there as and when you need them, and sometimes you'll use them to good effect, and sometimes you won't, and that's okay.
And I think you make that case very well. Right at the start of the book, you say that these tools are not going to mean that your life becomes perfect and you don't have any problems anymore. Not at all. You're equipping people with the skills that when those things happen, they've just got a better toolbox to approach them.
Yeah, I think it's I never want to give the impression that because I have access to this sort of knowledge that everything for me is perfect, and I have some sort of subhuman existence where no problem ever phases me. It's just not real. They're tools, and they help when you use them, and they're easier to use when you use them more of the time, but life is still really tough for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's a powerful message, because we can know stuff, but we're all human as well. So you can be an expert in this area and share tools. It doesn't mean you're going to be perfect at applying them. And I think sometimes I think about this sometimes through the lens of sport. And I think of, let's say, Tiger Woods, regarded as one of the greatest golfers of all time. Like, Tiger's had a coach for much of his career. Now, his coach can't play as well as Tiger, or he'd be playing. Yeah. He'd be Tiger Woods. But he can see Tiger, and he can help him go, oh, Tiger, actually, you need to, this is why your shot keeps going right, because you're doing this, right? And I think that's a really useful way, because sometimes I think we expect our teachers and our educators to be perfect. But that, again, is setting up a kind of false reality for us, where we think if I can't be perfect, then I'm failing. I know you do talk about failure in the book, but having a good relationship with failure is kind of important, isn't it, as well? Because we all fail from time to time, depending on how we define failure. Why did you decide to write about failure in the book?
I think it's just a huge subject that no matter who I've worked with over the years, you can't go through a therapeutic process with someone without experiencing a failure along the way, right? You know, if you're trying to make some sort of change in your life, failure is going to be a part of that learning process, because that's how we learn. You know, we learn through trial and error. And so when we have a culture of it's not okay to fail, or that failure says something fundamental about who you are as a person and your worthiness as a human being, then that develops a sort of defensive way of living where, you know, we stay back from risk. We don't do anything that might even give us a sign that we're going to fail. And when we do that and we kind of hold back, and our life just shrinks, and, you know, we say no to things because they have that element of risk of failure, and we never find out things could have gone okay.
Have you ever had those tendencies?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, this whole journey on social media has felt extremely vulnerable in terms of, you know, anything that you say, if you do something wrong, or, you know, you kind of embarrass yourself in front of potentially millions of people, that has to challenge that relationship with failure. And I think for me, because the account was never about me, that helped a lot, because it was based on, I want to share this information. It's not who I am. It's just something I'm doing because it seems like a good thing to do. I've got access to all this great psychological research and these techniques that I know help, and I know how to apply them. So I'm going to share them. It's not about me searching for validation in the world. And actually, you know, when I talk to my daughter, who's 9, about, you know, followers and things, she say, "Oh, how does it feel to have all these followers?" And I say, I'm still just me. It's not, I'm not any different. I'm no better or worse. If I switch that account off tomorrow, I'd still be exactly the same person. And so it doesn't mean anything about who I am as a person, which enables me to be vulnerable and make videos and share that kind of information. But I think as soon as we attach our kind of sense of self-worth to something, then failure can feel catastrophic.
I mean, what you just described there has been a huge part of my life. You know, I realized recently, before I did an interview with someone called Elizabeth Day, who has a podcast called How to Fail. And you have to send her 3 failures in your life. Oh man, that was a stressful experience for me, because I realized I'd kind of known this anyway for a few years, but as I had to really articulate things for Elizabeth before the conversation, I realized that I'd been so scared of failure my entire life that I wouldn't put myself in situations where failure was an option. So I would very skillfully avoid things. I would only play sports that I knew I could be the best at. Like, I wouldn't play them otherwise. It's like, oh no, I'm not going to be great at it. So it felt too painful, because for most of my life, I'd say until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I've got my value of who I am from success or external validation, which is a very lonely place to be. It's a very toxic place to be. As you say, it shrinks your world. You know, you don't sample all the wonders that the world has to offer because you don't want to risk failure. So when you said your platform is not who you are, that's very powerful, really powerful. Has that ever been challenged whilst you've been doing it? Is it, you're talking about it now with a real detachment, which is wonderful. Like, you know, I know that's just a part of me. That's my role as a psychologist. I'm sharing those tools. It's not who I am. Did you always have it okay with that? Or have there been times in that where you got sucked into, oh man, I've got some negative comments, you know, people are saying that video wasn't right, or that can be triggering. I don't know. You know, has that happened? And have you had to remind yourself of these things?
Yeah. And I think what's helped is that I have started this stuff later on. You know, I'm kind of in my mid-30s. I already have a family. I think if I was starting something like this much earlier in life, I wouldn't have the sense of self, firm, and the kind of the sense of identity that I perhaps needed to solidify before I made myself vulnerable in that way. And so I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. But yeah, I mean, there've been times, and you can get kind of sucked into this idea that, you know, I don't know, you could be in a situation where you get invited to something and it's all very grand and you're made to feel very important and you think, oh, this is very nice, and then, you know, you go back home and you're picking up dirty washing off the floor and, you know, you kind of what is this, and you have to be able to step back and see it for what it is, and see that you are consistently you throughout, and because I imagine it could be a really difficult experience to, I wouldn't like to feel a sense of fear that this could all end tomorrow, you know, because then who would I be? I know I am at that place where I know who I am, and because it's all happened so quickly, I know that I can survive without it, and that life would generally be okay if it all ended tomorrow, and I'd have these great stories for my grandchildren.
Can you still remember life pre-global TikTok status? Does that, do you ever go, I'd quite like to get back there? I mean, can you actually remember, or is it, you know, we very quickly adjust to our new reality, don't we? Yeah. So, I mean...
Yeah, I had more time back then. You know, I had this really nice balance. I was working kind of part-time and doing it around the children, and I had my third baby, and so I had time to, like, you know, go for coffee once a week with my friends who also had young babies, and those lovely times that felt I think the pandemic took those away as well, but it suddenly I became really, really busy, and so that was a part of it that I was a bit sort of, you know, I really want some of that balance back. But actually, that I think was temporary, and I've now got to a place where I feel more able to say no to certain things and keep that balance.
Well, that's, again, I think that's a lot of take home for people listening or watching, that you had made a decision around your work to have more time for your family. You know, you had this private practice, you do it around the school pickup. And so you got that balance, and then you blow up on TikTok, and so everything shifts again, and now you're refinding that balance. Yeah. And I think that's a powerful message, because I think even when we say work-life balance, it sounds sometimes as though this is a destination. At some point, I'm going to get to that mythical work-life balance place, but it never comes. It's always a moving target. And so I guess that metacognition, that awareness of knowing when you're moving out, is so important to kind of bring you back. Yeah,
because I also know I probably wouldn't be super happy if I had nothing to do. So, you know, it's always, like you say, a constant sort of balancing act. You never find that perfect center and stay there. Life pulls you in different directions. So it's about constantly being aware of, is this, you know, this kind of week I'm having, is this the kind of week I want to have all the time? And if not, how can I make a change for next week, even if that's a really small change, and so I can head in that direction. But it is a constant reevaluation, readjustment, I think.
I love what you said about the fact that this happened to you in your mid-30s.
Yeah, late 30s.
Late 30s. In your 30s, right? It's probably been a really good thing. And this is something I've spoken about, I don't think on the podcast before, but with friends or people I meet in professional settings. I said, I'm glad that when I went on BBC One with my own show, that I was happily married and I had kids. It's very grounding, isn't it? Because, as you say, you know, you're still picking up dirty washing and, you know, trying to clean up the kitchen. And, you know, my wife, she doesn't give two hoots about any of this stuff. She never has, even when we met, doesn't give a hoot about it. And I think that's so grounding, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's protective in its own way, because you can, you know, these sorts of things can disappear as quickly as they arrived. Totally. And so if you know that it's not about trying desperately to hold on to it, it's about knowing that whatever happens, you could survive it and you would be all right. And that gives you that grounding to be able to sort of walk into something with confidence. And so I guess for people who are sort of aiming for different things, patience is a really good thing to hold on to, because it doesn't have to happen today. And if it happens in 10 years down the road, you'll be more ready for it.
Does your diligent practice of attention to ritual, attention to your performance for that predictable uncertainty in the operating room, does that transfer over to help you be more resilient to that unpredictable uncertainty? You know, is there a unified skill set there? Is some of that skill transferable across? And therefore, does that mean all of us should in some ways try and do certain practices on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to prepare for when those uncertain events happen, as they always do? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this video and you want to learn more, then do check out my free special guide, which contains the 6 crucial steps you need to take in your life to not only build healthy habits, but also to make them stick. If you want to get hold of this free guide, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box below.
Excellent question. A difficult one, but I think one where I can just offer you my understanding. So the crisis management, whether in the operating room or outside of the operating room, there is a physiologic response that happens in our skulls, you know, the chemicals, hormones, electricity, blood flow. It's not just wiring. It's an ecosystem, and there's a response that happens. And what I've learned from the operating room is when I get into a tricky situation, the first thing I do is just prevent myself from hyperventilating. I think everybody thinks, oh, you're born with nerves of steel. Or no, you train yourself to be calmer, to allow that calmness to release the ability to come up with good solutions and behavior that's not reactive, that's not freaked out. So what the operating room has taught me is the cadence of breathing. And I think a lot of people are thrown off. They're like, this is a brain surgeon talking about breathing, you know, it's like, but there's physiology about that. And if I may, when we freak out for whatever reason, we breathe faster. And in the past, it was probably a saber-toothed tiger, and we'd appropriately freak out. And it was usually accompanied by running or movement. And as you know, when our muscles churn, we make carbon dioxide, which is the stuff we blow out and the things that, you know, plants absorb. But so we hyperventilate to get rid of that metabolic waste from the muscles churning. But if we hyperventilate or freak out and we're not running, we're just in the operating room, or we're sitting in our car, or we see something on our phone, well, now you're blowing off or, you know, evacuating carbon dioxide that you haven't built up from churning muscles. And that kind of hyperventilation, which actually lowers the levels of carbon dioxide in your blood, okay, that leads to twitchiness, frenetic thoughts, irritability. It's physiologic. Hyperventilating without also accompanied physical activity makes us nervous, gets in the way of our thinking. And so when we know that that's the biology and the physiology, I mean, you can measure it, then the first step in crisis management in the operating room is just slow it down and get it through my nose. Just 2-3 seconds in, 2-3 seconds out. My mind is racing. My mind is all over the place. But what I'm doing is not exacerbating my inner panic through hyperventilation. So the first thing I do, just slow it down with my breathing, and then just keep thinking, keep thinking. And I didn't always do that. I'd fog up my glasses when I was operating. And now people after the pandemic know what it is to have mask and glass. And imagine operating through that, right? You're nervous, you're panicking, you're learning how to operate, you're getting in the way by hyperventilating. Not only are you making yourself twitchy, you're fogging up the glasses you're operating, looking through as you operate. So I had to really get my breathing under check. And that's a thought process. Now I don't have to worry about fogging up my glasses because of my breathing, but that is my go-to move for crisis management in the operating room. Now, back to your question, unanticipated challenges and crises, you can't prepare for them the night before, right? That we can't do. But wherever you are in your moment and you feel that fear or panic or anxiety grip you, the weapon you have against that, it's not going to be equally effective in everybody, but the biology and the physiology that you can control with thought is to get that breathing under control, get that breathing under check. Whatever you do through that, you may still make a bad decision. I'm not trying to get to people having outcomes, but you'll be in the best position for you as that individual to think clearly and to have the most emotional regulation you can.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there to unpack. I think the key point that I'd love to just really just emphasize for everyone listening or watching is that you are a leading neurosurgeon. When the stakes are high, when the pressure starts to mount up, you start to focus on your breathing through your nose, 3 seconds in, 3 seconds out. That is what gets you through and able to perform, or one of the things I should say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And for people who are skeptical of breath work and the power of controlling your breath like that, I think the example you just demonstrated should shatter any skepticism remaining in someone to go, look, Rahul Jandial is doing it when he's operating. Well, maybe you might want to think about it when you're having a row with your partner, or when the kids are starting to wind you up and you're starting to react, or whatever it is. That's what I think is one of the powerful things about what you just said.
Thank you, brother. And it's free.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing is I just struggle so much. You know, I live in Los Angeles, and
the wellness capital of the world, man.
And I think I saw you on TV down here at the local TV station that I do stuff at one time. And they asked me about you. I said, yeah, he set me up with a wonderful opportunity and interview and interaction in London. So they were glad to have you. And
KTLA, I think that was.
Yeah. I've been doing that for 12 years. That's where I got my start, and it bounced off and ricocheted into different things. But, you know, Los Angeles is fascinating because, and I'm going to come back to this breathing. You know, it's not just Hollywood. Actually, if you look at it, it's such a huge place. And only the Hollywood Hills and small pockets are what most people have in mind when they think of Los Angeles. But there are also major university centers: UCLA, USC, JPL, Caltech, City of Hope, even Cedars. Then you go south, you get to Irvine. I mean, there's just a lot of powerhouse academics going on. And I think that's where I saw that breath and breathing, both edges, I saw it being sold at niche meditation yoga clubs. They charged people for it. And I felt, you know, that's too much, because this is a power that we're endowed with. And then on the other side, I saw it being applied to teaching patients how to calm down before they get their cancer diagnosis, or in their MRI machine every 3 months, waiting to see has the cancer spread. So you see like the spectrum of how breath and breathing control is presented. But absolutely, I mean, if I don't get my breathing right, I'm not at my best. And I don't mean just like, oh, my fingers are, you know, people are like, I'm not talking, my fingers don't shake. That's not the point. My thinking, my focus, the balance between my thought and emotion. You don't want all thought when you're operating. You have to have guts. But if it's all emotion, it's not tactical. So that fine thermostat, that for all of us, right? That balance between thought and emotion. The way to find that balance, to turn those knobs, to control those knobs, is to get breathing under control. I can show you and draw out the physiology with fancy little molecules, and we can put little tubes, a mask, and show you breathing and measure it. This is not something I'm talking about figuratively. I'm talking about literally. If you hyperventilate and you're not physically active, you're just going to freak yourself out even more.
In the moment of stress, you apply a certain technique to help you. Is that something you practice outside the operating room? Do you have a daily practice that to get better at it, so that when you need it, you can apply it better? Or is this just something you've picked up over time? That was one point. The other point, which is from your new book, which I'm definitely going to get into shortly because it's absolutely brilliant what I've read of it so far. There's this section where you talk about surgeons and how they often use a bit of tape at the side to prevent the fogging up. But you don't use that tape, because the message I was getting is that you use it as almost like an alarm sign. If you're starting to fog up, it's telling you, I need to control my breathing. So I found those two aspects really, really interesting.
But thank you. You know what? I think that's essentially the concept of when you hear the word neurofeedback. When you do something right, you get a positive response. So this is a real world situation. This isn't just, me talking about ideas and concepts. When I started training, the mask, we put tape over the mask, and that way, if we hyperventilated during a difficult part of the case, the hot air wouldn't go up to our glasses that have the magnifying loops on them. And now at this age, I'm 48, and at this, level of practice that I have, I actually don't use the tape much, or at all now, because I rely on that. When my glasses fog up, it actually tells me you're breathing too fast. So it's become my own little neurofeedback technique that, hey, you're breathing too fast. Your glasses are fogging up, slow it down. So I'm having this internal dialogue with myself as I'm navigating the people in the operating room, as well as when I'm operating. And I think that's the other lesson, is that by not hyperventilating, you allow your thoughts to turn inwards. And so you can have that inner dialogue about navigating the emotions, the thoughts, the breathing at that moment. And I think that behavior control is really powerful. It's something that has to be trained. So the operating room taught me that. Now, I don't do it as a ritual daily, but in moments where I feel anxious or strained or stressed, and whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, I notice myself only breathing through my nose. And, people say, well, it's through your nose or mouth. What's important is that you inhale slowly, and you don't just exhale quickly. There's a deliberate nature and cadence to the breathing. Yeah. And I find that in and out through the nose helps me set that just right. And I use it not on schedule, but as needed outside of the operating room.
Yeah, I've had quite a few guests now: Brian MacKenzie, Patrick McEwen, James Nestor on the show. We've spoken at length about breathing, some of the physiological benefits of nasal breathing, and it's interesting what you've landed upon yourself that helps you. We'll get more into things that we can do around stress, adversity, resilience, things we can do for our brain, I think maybe later on in the conversation. I'd love to turn my attention to your new book, Life on a Knife's Edge, which wasn't what I was expecting after your last book. And I've got to say, it was a really pleasant surprise. It's so personal. The storytelling is incredible. And I thought some of the concepts in it are well worth exploring in our conversation today. So sort of as a primer, I've been thinking a lot about you over the last few days in preparation for this, and your job, as a neuroscientist and as a neurosurgeon, and I thought, and I wonder, what has your job given you with respect to an insight on this incredible organ? Not only have you studied the organ, you are literally looking at that organ in an operating theatre several times a week. What sort of insight does that give you about how powerful this organ is that the rest of us who don't have the opportunity possibly fail to grasp?
I would take that in a slightly different direction. I'll show you how I get there. When I first started, just seeing somebody's forehead removed and seeing like the glistening white frontal lobes with those beautiful arteries, so fine and tortuous. It was mesmerizing. I almost thought, is that impossible? So the first part of my career, I was fascinated by the actual craft, the work, the anatomy, the structure itself. But along the way, there's been an evolution in my focus, if you will, or purpose even, that I saw it as really a window to study humanity. Now, I've operated on thousands. I mean, imagine opening thousands of skulls. And as you know, that means I've met a lot more people. You don't operate on everybody that comes to see you, and you don't operate every day of the week. So I've met over 10,000 people, operated on more than several thousand skulls and brains and things like that. You could look at it that way, or you could see it as, think about all the different people I've met, and I've met them all in their crises. I've met them all in their most difficult times in their lives, and they've let me come aboard and partner with them and journey with them for a little bit. And so I started to see the ways in which they coped. I started to see the ways in which they suffered badly. I started to see some that were triumphant in moments where I think I would just flail. And so what I've learned as a brain surgeon and neuroscientist is sort of the human story of these people who see growth in their own lives based on their description when we would perceive it as calamity, a cancer diagnosis, a scan where the cancer has spread. And they have shown me that not always, but that difficult times, they hold a reservoir for growth. Nobody wishes they go through difficult times like these. But those are the lessons I've seen. And that's sort of what I get into with the stories in the book, is the optimism and the heroism and and just sort of the transcendence of the things that usually encumber us, the little thought, the little steps, the little frustrations. So in some ways they're set free. It's not something they choose for themselves, but when that finish line comes into view, because I take care of advanced cancer patients, they live differently, and they often wonder, why did not we have these focuses, focus on these kind of things, quality of life before the cancer diagnosis. So I've gone from a surgeon to a neuroscientist to somebody who now really appreciates the human story through my patients.
It's fascinating that your job, you say that it enables you to study humanity. And I wonder, given that you see incredibly sick patients and challenging patients and people who really might be at the end of the road, and actually this is the last gasp hope when they come to see you, does that give you a skewed view of humanity? If your professional life is full of a certain type of person in need, do you think that is a beautiful lens through which to see all humanity, or does it potentially, skew that view where you only see one particular aspect of humanity?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a skewed view. I've taken care of thousands of patients, and I've helped hundreds of people pass away, end of life. It's definitely a skewed view. But what I would say is it offers us insight and perspective to a fate that we will all face, that the finish line and death and mortality is unavoidable. And the lessons I have learned from people who are facing it, some young, some old, but there is clarity in those moments that I want to share with people who have yet to face that final moment or those final struggles. And so it is definitely a skewed perspective, but a rare one, I think, that can shed light on how to live fully and how to live your life, realizing that it does end one day. And I think those insights are positive and optimistic and triumphant. They're not negative. They're not pessimistic. And so they inspire me. They enlighten me with their descriptions of what they wish they would have done differently now that the end is within sight.
What are some of the insights that you've learned that have changed you and changed the way that you live your life? Because it's that, it's that frustrating thing about the human experience that we often need to confront our own mortality before we start truly living. Yet I wonder, because you have seen that so many times, has that infused into your brain and you thought, you know what, I don't want to wait till I'm confronting my own mortality. I want to start living now.
Yeah, I didn't get there. I mean, it takes age, it takes your own life experiences. There is no shortcut. Just because I take care of cancer patients doesn't mean I think of death all the time. In fact, only recently have I started to put it together and have a synthesis of what I've been seeing and experiencing, and I'm 48 years old. But what it means for me is not just to live well or live fully, because that's sort of a personal dimension. But what are the lessons we can take from the approach cancer patients implement when they're facing those crises? So I can't bring people to, hey, life's going to end one day, make the most of it. That's not my intention. And people have had struggles in many different ways. I do pediatric neurosurgery. I've seen parents lose children. I've done trauma surgery. I mean, there are insights from all of those patients, but the techniques, the approaches that I see cancer patients utilize, to me, that's fascinating. So let's take one example. After the cancer diagnosis, you have to get scans all the time. I mean, it's every 3 months for life. And I always think, how scary must that be to be in that scanner? What are they going to find? Has it come back? Has it grown? Is it the same? It's a lot of uncertainty to face that, not just having a trauma that you survive and say, that's in the rear view. Remember 5 years ago, we got in a car accident. It was a very difficult experience. Their trauma unfolds every 3 months. And so what I saw was they started to do sort of a compartmentalization of the 3 months. And I started guiding my patients about that too. Like, listen, 3 months, when you see that invitation for the MRI from Rahul Jandial, it's gonna be disruptive. Of course it is. You can't be mindful when you see the MRI request come in. You can't be centered. It's gonna rock you a little bit. So what we do is we try to limit that disruption so it doesn't eat into the 11 weeks in between. So we come up with this plan. You're going to get a request. That week is going to suck. You have to come in, wait in long lines, just be miserable, let it be disruptive, put yourself first. We'll get in the scanner. You'll see me afterwards, or I'll call you, and let's just brace for that week. But what we do is we protect the time before and after that. So there's a structure in which they say, okay, it's going to be a rough week because I have a scan and I've had something called scanxiety, and that's a difficult time. So we compartmentalize, because you can't just say, don't stress out. That's not fair, especially with their situation. Yeah. So they have little release valves and time points when they allow themselves to stress out, that, hey, I've got a brain scan this week. It's going to be a rough week for me, and that's okay. But after and before, let's protect that time to live fully. So that's like one technique I learned from cancer patients that I try to apply to my life as well.
There's a certain intentionality, isn't there, living like that? And as you describe that, I'm struck by, how many of us just live on autopilot. We don't really think about what we're doing day to day. We're just existing. Before we know it, it's the end of the month. Before we know it, the season has changed. But what I'm hearing... Yeah, but what I'm hearing from these patients is that because of the 3 monthly scan, they have to, I guess, like an athlete in some ways, live with intention. That's the stressful part. Like that could be, for an athlete, the performance. That's when you're having your race. But whilst you're training, you're going to have some build weeks. You're going to have some rest weeks. I'm super conscious that I'm not trying to say being an athlete and suffering from cancer. It's the same thing at all. Just to be super clear, but there's something about that rhythm that they have a certain rhythm to life because of these fixed points.
Brother, that's you captured it well. The word season. So I'm just going to go on a random riff here. I hope you don't mind. It's not.
That's what this show's all about. You go for it.
Look, man, the problem is thinking in terms of something being linear or wires. And what I have learned from patients, and what is true neurobiology. I mean, you take a piece of brain, you put it under a microscope, the neurons branch towards each other. We call it arborization. The ones you don't engage, the brain trims them. We call it pruning. So seasons and gardens and ecosystems is the right way to think of your brain. And that's something cancer patients too. There will be a season of growth, but there will also be a winter. That doesn't mean the winter puts you back. It's not 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's you're pulsing through your life. There are moments of triumph, but that's not forever. Maybe that's springtime. And there are moments of tragedy or difficulty, and that's not forever either. So if we really start to see our brains, and I just wish I could show people, it's like 100 billion electric jellyfish crammed into a skull that's floating in clear liquid, spraying chemicals and electricity like it's aurora borealis. If we knew we are like that in our skulls, I think we would see our mind and reactions and behavior differently. And I think your word season is spot on. There are seasons of growth, and there are seasons of, sort of winter and loss. And there are also sort of seasons within the brain where things are dormant. There are brain cells that are dormant until you have a certain stress. And that's the cue for them to activate. If the stress is too high, they stay dormant. If there isn't any stress, they stay dormant. So if we start to think of our brains as gardens, it fits more with the patterns of life that cancer patients have. A very difficult diagnosis. What do you do next? Just suffer for the 3 years ahead or the 13 years ahead? So they bring in this concept of the seasons of their year, difficult moments, surgery, chemotherapy, radiation. That was a difficult season. After that, they have some vitality and a good window to see family and travel. That's springtime in their life. I think if we do it that way, our stumbles and our difficulties don't feel like setbacks. They just feel like something that we push through, we brace through, we manage through that crisis for this next springtime in our life that will arrive. That approach in their minds serves them well.
Past hurt informs future fear. So wherever we've had any past hurts, then the brain is going to go, well, that sucked. I don't want to do that again. I'm going to make sure that I can personally manage and control my environment such that I mitigate the repetition of the thing that hurt, right? Which seems very logical. Unfortunately, it's really not, because what happens is we tend to perpetuate the very thing we're trying to avoid because we're actually in the energy of it. We haven't reconciled it. So when I'm helping people, I'm really cleaning up their history so that they're no longer using that as evidence to project into a future possible repetition of something that hurt them, right? So like I take one of my NBA players, basketball, who had the worst league. I think I spoke about him on the first podcast we did, but he had the worst league average in terms of free throw shooting at 37%. The league average is 75. So it's not even 50% of that. Like it's half of the average. And so what was happening in his brain, because it's for an athlete who's being paid millions of dollars to perform, it's embarrassing. It's, he felt guilt and shame and all of these things that human beings do everything we can to avoid. So when he's standing there, his brain is like, well, make sure you don't miss again because that really hurts. But now he's actually put himself into a position of a preemptive failure, which for an athlete is kryptonite because now he's tense and he's worried, which doesn't allow him to perform from the place that he does effortlessly when he's relaxed. So it becomes self-fulfilling. This is when people talk about this self-fulfilling prophecy of the mind is, well, if we worry about a fear, then we tend to actually live from a place energetically with a frequency that is the precursor to it. So that, that's where we attract the very thing that we're trying to avoid, ironically, until such time that we get to a place where we can go, oh my gosh, I'm just living from history, and my hurts and fears are the byproduct of things that I haven't fully accepted in my life. So to answer your question, first thing is the awareness of the pattern. Secondly, compassion. It's okay. You're human. You know, there's not a human being on the planet who doesn't have some kind of fear. It's okay. You know, if you're a parent, you understand if your child is scared, you hold a space for them. You don't berate them or you don't judge them and go, that's stupid. You know, you have compassion. You're like, it's okay, come here. You would hold them, you'd give them a hug, you'd reassure them, right? So that's what we want to do for ourselves, is recognize, oh, okay, it's just a primal pattern in me where I'm trying to avoid something that could hurt me. That's, you know, survival, as you said, but it's unnecessary because I'm the one creating the illusion of the future that I'm now trying to avoid. When you see that part, it becomes kind of comical. You've got one brain, like if you really break it down, one brain projecting a future that you don't want, and then the same brain that created the illusory future is now trying to avoid it. Yeah. I mean, when you really see that, it becomes borderline comical. I tell people that you can't help but laugh when you realize the only thing upsetting you is your own imagination.
What I love about your approach and our previous conversations, Peter, is you really help bring an awareness to people. And I think that awareness is such a crucial and critical step, because until we get that awareness, we're sort of walking around with blindfolds on. We sort of are at the mercy of other people and other things around us influencing the way we act. And we kind of feel that if the world around us changed, if the people around us changed and behaved in a different way, we'd be okay.
Yeah.
When you get to that point, I'd like to think I did a few years back, where you realize that that is not the case at all. That is a myth that you have created inside your brain. Yeah. It is freedom. And I can see why you say that the main product you offer people is freedom. Yeah. And I'd love you to sort of define, what do you mean by freedom? Because I think if you ask 10 people on the street, would you like to be free? They'd say, yeah. But I guess those 10 people might have a different definition of what freedom really means. So what does it mean to you?
They also might think that they already are. Therein lies the real conundrum, right? Because you go up to Joe Blow on the street and say, you know, are you free? They'll be like, well, yeah. Like, you know, they're under the impression from a conscious perspective, meaning the conscious thinking they have, that they have free will, that they, you know, if they want to go to work, they go to work. If they want to go to the pub, they go to the pub. Like, they're under the impression that because they have some illusion of choice, that they're free. What I'm pointing to, and you articulated it beautifully, is that one of the biggest illusions of a human being is that our experience is generated from circumstance. So it, therefore, ipso facto, it's only sensical that if we think we feel the way we feel because of what's going on, well, then what are we going to do? We're going to try and control what's going on because that's the precursor to how we feel, and we want to feel good. But that's exhausting. There's no freedom there at all. That's called victim of circumstance, right? So my product, what I mean about freedom, to quote Krishnamurti, who was one of my sort of teachers when I was very young and I found his books, he'd already passed. He's sort of an old traditional Indian guru. And he had a beautiful quote. He said, "This is my secret. I don't mind what happens." And, you know, if you can really feel into the energy of that, it's incredibly liberating. Now, I've got an addendum to that. I say, yeah, I don't mind what happens, and I have a personal preference, right? So I can get to a place where, yeah, I'm okay with the fact that whatever's going on is going on. And if I don't have any direct control over that, then it's a futile endeavor for me to just grapple with something that's not in my immediate zone of some sort of responsibility. So that's where we want to reconcile and surrender and go, okay, well, it is the way it is. It's not like I don't want my flight to be canceled, for example. And that's going to have the ramifications of now I'm going to be late for my meeting wherever I'm flying to, or I'll miss my connection or whatever it is. I don't want that to happen. But if I'm sitting at the gate in an airport and just getting really bent out of shape, that's all self-inflicted. Now I'm a victim of circumstance, versus to stay centered, to stay at peace, to have a much bigger understanding of the universe as a whole, and the things that are unfolding are in accordance with how things are unfolding, and not to be in a state of resistance to that, is what elicits the internal experience of freedom. I'm no longer at the mercy of what's unfolding. In fact, we never were. That's the irony. We think we're, I'm upset because the missus said something, or I'm upset because my family did something, or I'm upset because I lost some money on the stock market. No, none of that ever affected anyone. It didn't. What affected us is our reaction to it. So it's still us. So I'm helping people transcend that world of self-inflicted suffering under the guise of the illusion of that it was the external world that was the instigator of your suffering. No, it looked that way, but it never was. And once you see the truth, which is, wow, I am 100% responsible for the experience of my life, I'm the one generating how I feel, then why would anybody with an ounce of intelligence want to generate suffering? They wouldn't. And that's freedom.
Yeah. It's sort of beyond intelligence, though, isn't it? Because you're right. People, when they hear that, they don't want to generate their own suffering, yet they often still do. And it's not because there's not a desire to change it, because ultimately we create the narrative. We can write the story that we want to write about that event that just happened. And, why not choose a story that kind of sits well with us and keeps us relaxed and calm? And I think that plane example, the plane being late, or the train being late, or the bus being late, whatever it is, right? I think it's a really good example, because it's a very tangible kind of day-to-day event that affects a lot of people. So if we just use that example, I don't know if you've had an experience with this recently or not, but what can someone do in that situation? So, they're waiting on the train, they're waiting for the train to take them into London, because they've got a meeting, but the train's cancelled because of road travel works, or whatever works, rail works, I should say. Yeah. And so man, I'm going to miss my meeting. And then you can actually feel that stress start to build up in your body as that is happening. So in that moment, what can someone do to kind of change the narrative and stop that lack of ease building up inside themselves?
Great question. So first of all, what you said is to feel like the primal reaction to that, right? Like you can feel the stress, you might get a little sweaty in the armpits, the brain starts to ruminate a little bit more, you're trying to figure out solutions. It's a mild form of panic, right? Panic is a strong word, but really viscerally, biologically, we go into a state of mild panic. So why? Well, the subtext of the reaction is that there's going to be some sort of pending doom, right? In lay terms, there's this feeling that it's not going to work out. Like whatever it is that we think we need to get, we're putting the future in a context of concern that whatever the intention is, going to work or going to a job interview or meeting, maybe you've got a hot date you're on the way to and you're not going to be there on time. And there's this feeling fundamentally of the experience of loss, which for a human being is very scary because it fights the primal instinct to feel secure, right? We want to feel held. We want to feel safe. And when something in any way intervenes potentially with what we think is going to give us that security. I mean, we think about all the things that give us security, like money is a big one, job security, financial security, even a relationship, having some sort of love or companionship as a form of security. So when there's any perceived threat that could pull any of those things away, then the primal urge in us is like, oh no, I'm not going to be okay. Now, to notice that pattern and realize it's illusory. You feel that way, but as I tell nearly everyone, your feelings are a lousy indicator of truth, right? Just because you feel that way, it's not what's going to happen. So if you're sitting there and maybe you're, a little bit nervous, you're on the way to a job interview, And it means a lot to you because certainly with what's been going on in the world, maybe you've been laid off, made redundant or something, and you're feeling the pressure of paying rent or your mortgage and providing for your family. These are all very real situations. And so going to the interview means a lot to you. So wherever we put more significance, we're actually also leaving ourselves more vulnerable, right? Wherever we put more importance on something, we're actually creating more potential resistance. Right? So once we see that and go, okay, this means so much to me, I really need this job. Well, then if the train's canceled, then the cancellation is like magnified, right? Because there's the significance to the event itself, which appears like it's not going to work. Now, what could someone do in that situation? Well, first of all, you just got to deal with reality, right? Which is you can't just like click your fingers and, sort of like Alice in Wonderland or something appear at the interview site. You just got to deal with it. Maybe you get out of the underground and you get a cab, or maybe the next train is only going to be 20 minutes. I don't know. And you be responsible. You maintain integrity. So you would call the person, the company that you're going for an interview and say, I really apologize for the inconvenience. I'm on my way. Unfortunately, a train has been canceled. This really means a lot to me. I hope that we can, reschedule for 30 minutes from now. You don't know how that's going to be met when you come from an authentic place. They might find that to be the most important part of your interview process because of the way you dealt with it. So you could energetically say, that's actually the best thing that ever happened because I can display to this potential employer how responsible I am and the degree of integrity I have that I'm going to communicate to you and let you know that, yes, life happens, but I'm handling it gracefully. And hopefully that bodes well for you looking at me as a potential employee where there can be stressful situations, but I'm already displaying before I even get to the interview site that I can handle these things. So it could, through reframing, be the best part of your day that it got canceled and you were able to demonstrate the ability that you have to have integrity, responsibility, and authenticity, and therefore you got the job before you even got there, right? That's how my brain works, is everything is an opportunity. Yeah. And it reminds me in kanji, which is the Japanese symbols, the word for challenge and opportunity, it's the same symbol.
Love it.
Yeah. But it's so like just the energetics of understanding that is so, okay, it looks like something bad happened. In my world, nothing ever bad happens, just something happens. And then it's the way that we choose to reframe it.
Yeah, I love that. And if we play that story out even further, and I think the key thing there for me was, having integrity and coming from a place of authenticity when you call up that person to reschedule or explain what's happened. And that could be the best part of the interview process. But let's say the people who you have an interview with didn't like that. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. If you can't show up on time, then you could also continue that narrative and go, oh, I got the opportunity to stress test this company and see how they handle some very basic, simple things in life. This didn't go the way I planned it to, and that's how they responded. I'm glad I know now what I didn't go and sign up for that company. Do you know what I mean? There's infinite possibilities.
Yeah, there's a myriad of different ways that we can interpret it. But as I was saying, the fundamental subtext that I want people to understand is that regardless of what happens, your life's taken care of. And that's the subtext that allows you to sink into surrender with a really profound sense of trust. Now, it's not a knowing. You don't know what's going to happen. It's an energetic experience where, like I joked, I think even again on our first podcast, like I'm a trust fund baby. Not, my parents both died when I was very young. I wasn't left one penny because whatever money my dad had, which wasn't much, went to a stepmother. And I trust the universe. Like when things in my personal life, my subjective wants and not wants don't unfold as I would like, I still trust that, okay, even though I wanted something and it didn't happen, the fact that it didn't manifest is in ways that I don't understand, still for my benefit. Right? That's the profound, deeper sense of like trust that things are unfolding in a way that little old me, I don't fully understand, yet I am still the beneficiary of. And that gives people an internal sense of calm and peace.
I'm totally on board with that. but I suspect there'll be some people who push back against a thought like that. They think, well, what do you mean that I just need to trust that everything's working out the way that it is? You know, I'm struggling to make my ends. You know, I'm struggling to make ends meet. You know, I don't have the job of my dreams. I see everyone around me crushing it at life, and I'm kind of struggling. What do you mean everything's sort of panning out the way it was meant to? And I guess that sort of dovetails into something else, which is coming out in this conversation, something I've heard you say before, that we are 100% responsible for our lives. But what would you say to those people who sort of push back a bit and go, you know, it's all right for you, buddy, but I wasn't born into, I don't know, money, opportunity. I didn't go to a great school.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because I guess, is that something you hear a lot with your work? Or is that the pushback that if you ever get any pushback, would you say that is one of those things?
I don't get a lot of it, but I mean, I totally understand your point, and it's very valid that people feel that way. But equally, for those people who don't know my story, you know, I didn't even have parents. I wasn't left a penny. I wasn't born into money, you know. So
sure.
It's not like it's an excuse, you know, like for sure, if you look at a trust fund baby and whoever it is, like literally like the Paris Hiltons and the whatever, people who've got stacks of cash, if they sit there and they espouse about, oh, don't worry, like, that comes across as a bit disingenuous, you know, because like, well, duh, you know, you never had to freaking lift a finger. You know, I've done it all, you know, like working at a waiter, like hoping that I get 50 pence tip, or, you know, it's like the whole thing, you know. So it's a valid concern, first of all. I really always want to acknowledge people's reality, but it's nonetheless inaccurate. So we have to redefine what it is it means to be human and what everyone's after, right? So with the person who's struggling, they don't have the job of their dreams, maybe they don't have money, they weren't left anything, whatever their validation is for their woe, they're under the impression that their happiness, like we started this conversation, is dependent on their circumstance, right? It still goes back to the same point that you're a victim of circumstance. But the happiness, the true happiness, which again, I shared on your podcast, is the absence of the pursuit of happiness, or the absence of the search for happiness, right? So it's not dependent on my circumstances. My joy and my inner peace is not because of something. It's my own semblance of centeredness and self-acceptance regardless of circumstance. That ironically is the precursor to everything changing around me. So the person who's pushing back a little bit to this previous conversation that we were on, they're just showing the resistance they have, the fight that is in them relative to their life circumstances. That itself, ironically, is the foundation of their suffering, right? So their argument for why they're not happy is the actual precursor to why they're not happy, right? Do you know Byron Katie? She's, so she's a lovely, you know, I'm not that familiar with her work, but I've heard some of her quotes, and one that comes to mind that I really like, she says, you know, when you fight life, you lose, but only 100% of the time. Right? So if someone's in disagreement with anything, including me, I'm an expression of life in their view right now. They're listening to this podcast, they're listening to the conversation, and they're like, nah, this guy's full of shit. Like, well, I'm just saying something. It's not like it's gospel. I'm just sharing my opinion. And hopefully, you know, as a man who cares with a big heart, who's sensitive, I'm just trying to change people's lives for the better. And if someone doesn't like that, well, okay, that's fine. You can listen to somebody else. But your resistance to what I'm saying is your suffering. It's not because I'm saying something. You know, there's a great line in the third Matrix, which I'm sure you're familiar with the trilogy, and theme of the day. That's our trilogy with you and me today. But in the third one, the Zion, which is the headquarters for the quote unquote free souls, like Neo from the, Keanu Reeves character, where all the people have been freed out of the Matrix, right? Where they're in this sort of mental psychotic illusion where, again, like we're talking about, they think that their life is all about success and fame and, you know, the corner office and status and all of this. They are being under attack from the machines. So everybody has to retreat to Zion, which is sort of at the center of the world or wherever it is. And for that reason, all the ships have to come back to defend their home. And when Morpheus, Lawrence Fishburne's character, comes back, he meets with the head of defense. And there's this contentious relationship between them as part of Hollywood. But, you know, the head of defense basically lets Morpheus have it. He said, I told everybody they've got to bring their ships back. We've got to defend Zion. And Morpheus has left his ship out in the Matrix so he can communicate with the Oracle, who's basically the fortune teller, because he wants to know the fate of the world and is Neo going to save everyone? Is he the chosen one, right? So the head of defense says, damn it, Morpheus, not everyone believes what you believe. And Morpheus says, my beliefs do not require them to.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this video and want to learn more, you can download my free special guides containing 6 simple breathing practices that will help you calm your mind, lower stress, and improve your energy. To get hold of this guide, all you have to do is click on the link in the description box below.
Now, it's a very powerful line, right? Because what he's saying, like the head of defense talking about you leaving the ship there because you believe in the one and whatever. He's like, not everyone believes what you believe. But Morpheus is so grounded in his beliefs that it doesn't matter what other people believe. Do you see?
Yeah.
And that to me is such a powerful stance for somebody to be in, where I'm not at the effect of other people's opinions. So I can listen to anybody tell anything, from Catholicism to Buddhism, if it's religion or it's politics. I listen from a place of they're just sharing their opinion. So I'm no longer at the mercy of something. And this is where people's egos are very fragile and where people get into fights in relationships, because somebody says blah, 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 and their blah, blah, blah doesn't fit with the other person's blah, blah, blah belief, and now they fight. Versus, no, okay, have at it. Believe whatever you want to believe, you know? If you think that you're going to come back as some goddess or a queen, or that you lived in past lives as like this knight in shining armor, or you believe that, I mean, good luck to you. Have at it. You know, let's see how it works. Who am I to tell you how to live your life?
I mean, relationships are something that, you know, they make the world go round, right? Relationships with other people, that's who we are. You said earlier in this conversation that the amount of importance you put on something, almost put the more importance you put on it, the more vulnerable you become, because the more kind of attached, I guess, you are to the outcome of however you're sort of showing up in that realm. So let's say in the relationship realm,
yes,
you know, you really value your partner, and therefore everything in that interaction means so much more to you. But it means if you're not careful, you can also be very vulnerable to feeling really bad and getting really upset with things, because of how that goes down. And I wanted to talk about relationships today, you know, through the lens through which you look at the human experience.
Yeah.
What are some of these common patterns that come up in relationships that end up causing so much conflict?
I mean, great question. And they're these very primal patterns where fundamentally as human beings, we want to be loved and accepted. That's really what it comes down to. And so when we're in a relationship with someone who we're under the assumption has chosen us, you know, if it's a wife or a partner or a husband or whatever, or even family, you know, there's this sort of unwritten rule that, well, you know, you love me. And then if they display any behaviors that are in conflict with that, then we feel threatened again. Right, so we're putting a lot of the onus on people around us to provide the security and the reassurance and the sense of self-worth for us. But that is a very slippery slope. I literally helped 2 clients yesterday and today, this morning briefly, who are struggling with the fact that a relationship they're in has fallen apart and their partner is now already with somebody else. And it's really triggering in them their feeling that they're not loved. But as I explained to them, that was there before you even met that person. That was your karma because you had your relationship with your mom or your dad where you felt that you weren't the chosen one. You weren't as special as a sibling, or, you know, your dad was a little bit absent, or your mom didn't quite give you enough attention. You know, it's such a big topic because every human being has got their version of trauma. It's just most people don't really look. It's just become baked into their personality. You know, personality, meaning your personal reality, is now an extension of what you went through as a child. The trials and tribulations, the hurts and the failures and the disappointments sort of get baked into who you think you are, so that now when you're an adult and you're in a relationship, if there's anything that has any sort of semblance of what you went through as a child, where you felt dismissed, you felt unwanted, you felt you did something wrong, you felt like you weren't valuable or special, wherever you feel your partner do the same, boom, straight comes up that hurt from your childhood. That's the power of relationship, really, as far as I'm concerned, is to reveal those things within us that have yet to be reconciled. That's the beauty. Now, of course, most people don't look at it that way, so they just fight and they throw spatulas and frying pans and, you know, talk to my lawyer and, you know, use the kids as bargaining tools or whatever it is. I mean, it's pretty ugly. But yes, relationships are beautiful, and I'm all about companionship and love and having fun and intimacy and meeting people and traveling the world. But really, as far as I'm concerned, relationships are the conduit for our own spiritual evolution to reconcile where we're still trapped based on our past traumas.
And those relationships could be relationships with anyone, not just
Anyone.
our partner, our friends, the person at the shop, your boss, your work colleague, I guess. And what I'm hearing, and something I strongly believe, is that in many ways, the people around us can be our therapists if we look at them in that way. You know, I'm not saying it's the same as going to see a therapist, right? I understand that, you know, that there's a different skill set there. But in some ways, you can look at it, look, I'm being presented on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, areas that I'm not okay with. And if I look at it, if I choose to sort of come into my power and not make myself a victim, I can actually start to work on some of these things through the relationship. This way of thinking puts the individual in the driver's seat of their life. There's nothing worse than feeling that you are a victim to circumstance. That if the train came on time, I'd be happier. If my wife behaved in a certain way, I'd be happier. If my mum didn't do that, I'd be happier. If A, B, C, D, you know, go to Z and then start again. It's you're a prisoner, aren't you? It's in that story that I choose to tell myself that I get my power and that I get my freedom, right?
Yeah. When you realize, hang on a minute, I'm the one generating my own experience of life. Like, I'm literally creating how I feel. That is empowering. And I'm not a victim of circumstance. I don't need my mom. I don't need my mother-in-law. I don't need my boss. I don't need my spouse. I don't need my children to act in a certain way for me to be okay. That's the fundamental lie that humans are telling themselves, is that I can only be okay when everything is in accordance to my subjective view. Like, if you really break that down, it's completely nonsensical. First of all, it's completely audacious. It's like, I didn't get the memo that Rangan's in charge of the universe and how everybody should be. Like, it's preposterous. Like, and if you are, then I didn't get the email that told me. And if that's the case, then let me know how I'm supposed to behave for you. It's like, it's comical to realize, wow. And again, there's compassion, right? It's not like you idiot, you've always been responsible for your life. It's like, no, it's okay. Wake up and realize, oh, yeah, why do I have to get so upset because, you know, my mother-in-law left the milk on the different, like, you know, shelf in the fridge that I don't like it there. It's like, really? Is that really upsetting me? Or is it a deeper sense of feeling not respected or not seen, which reminds me of when I was a child and I never got that sort of acknowledgement from my dad. And it's really the same energy that's just manifesting now as a 44-year-old and through my mother-in-law not putting the milk in the right position. You know, but that's empowering to go, wow, that's so childish. Because really, when you break it down without judgment, it's always childish when people get upset. It's like an adult tantrum that people have. You know, they sulk, you know, they just use different language, they'll curse. But really, it's like you're having a tantrum. You know, you're sulking.
Peter, I've been on a, I guess you would call it a self-growth journey for a number of years now. For me, I think it really started when my dad died, just over 8 years ago now.
Okay.
And I feel that certainly my experience has been that there's multiple stages on that journey, that it's an evolution. And I just feel these days, mate, so much happier, so much calmer.
Yeah. Beautiful.
I kind of just don't feel this tension that I think has always driven me in the past. I'm just much more, I think I'm able to be in the present much more than I used to be. I'm very accepting of the way life is and not trying to wish it was another way. And occasionally if I do, I'll catch it now early. I'll be like, okay, here we go. You're trying to play that old record. I thought I'd got rid of that record, but it's kind of, this situation is me wanting to play that record. So I feel, we've had 3 conversations, right? I know we've been out and had dinner and hung out as well, but we've had 3 conversations on the podcast, and it can always be a risky thing to ask, but, I don't know. Would you, having had 3 pretty deep and lengthy conversations with me, what is your reading of me? Is it possible to make a reading of me from these conversations? I don't want to put you on your spot or if you don't feel you've got enough information, but I'm intrigued as to what you might say about some of my traits.
For sure. I'm always happy to share. I mean, it's typically when somebody's sharing something they're dealing with. So you're sort of coming in from a different angle, which is where you're saying that you're actually not dealing with too much, right? Like when I'm helping people, it's invariably because they're struggling with something, right? But again, I've known you for a while, and you gave me a few tells, more so in our first podcast. If you remember, you're talking about some of your friends, and I sort of broke down some of your language, and it was just your way of speaking that reinforced what I'd want to point out for you today, which is the only thing I feel in you is that you're a little bit overly self-conscious. Now, what that means is when someone's self-conscious, they're aware of themselves. Now, the only reason somebody would have to do that is that they have some underlying, it can be subtle, it can be really severe, but there's mild concern about the way that they are or aren't going to be accepted by their environment. So the fact that I know, with your heritage, your ethnicity, perhaps, I've worked with a lot of people who were perhaps of a different religion or a different skin tone, and they were in an environment, a community, a school, perhaps like one of my friends from South America, he went to an all-white Jewish school, and so he was, quote unquote, he stood out like a sore thumb, and for that reason he was bullied, and it made him feel very conscious of his heritage. So the energy of self-consciousness is where you, in your programming, again, just from my read, will have had moments where you were very aware of yourself and how others perceived you, right? And potentially, usually in a position where you might have been made fun of or bullied or stood out or, the opposite, not belonged, didn't fit in. And so when that's part of somebody's history, the brain tends to become a little bit too active and too sensitive, what I call hypervigilant. So you're a smart guy, you're well-educated, you're intelligent, but I feel you're using those resources a little bit too much in regards to making sure that, you're not rocking the boat. Am I okay here? Did I say anything to offend anybody? Do you like me? Like that realm, which when you tap into it, maybe even as I'm saying it, you'll say whether it resonates or not, it can be draining to the system. Because what you're actually saying is, I don't accept me. I'm sort of hoping you do so that I can feel relaxed. But that's not a powerful place to be. That's still the mild victim of circumstance where you're basically overly self-aware. And so you're attending to your safety in an environment. It might not feel like safety. You're not going to be stabbed or anything, but that's how it occurs at the primal level is like, as human beings, we want to belong. And wherever in your history you've had a sense of perhaps not belonging, now you become hypersensitive to that. So now as an adult, even though consciously you know it doesn't make sense, viscerally at a deep subconscious level, you're like, oh, you know, I hope I'm not saying anything to offend anyone. I hope I get accepted in this group. I hope they like me. And that energy is a disservice to you and to others, because it makes a little bit of a block. There's a little bit of a barrier energetically between you and others, because you're actually in a relationship with your own concern about what others think about you versus just being with others, whether they like you or not. So that's sort of what I think.
Yeah, well, first of all, I appreciate you going there and appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. You know, how to respond to that. I think there's a lot of truth to that. I can, you know, as you were saying it, I definitely felt it. I definitely, with my rational brain, know that has been a pattern. My rational brain feels that it's a lot better than it used to be. Like,
for sure,
significantly better. Like, if it was 100% before, in my rational brain, again, I'm using the word rational brain very carefully, because I think we can overthink things sometimes. I feel, I overthink things. I certainly have that tendency. I kind of feel it's about 10% now if it was 100%, but it's very hard for us to see things ourselves, right? Sometimes it takes somebody else to actually shine a light on an area. And there's something about what you said. Yeah, I felt it in my body, right? So that's a pretty good sign that, hey, there's something there. And I want to thank you for that, because it's a gift, isn't it? It's a gift to me to say, hey, look, maybe sort of sit with that thought later, you know, really feel into that. Because I guess I thought I'm sort of close to pretty much being over that, but you're feeling that it's still there. And I guess as you say it, I think I do too, mate, if I'm honest.
Yeah, which I really appreciate, you know, like, because the irony of whatever our constraint is, it's the last thing we want to reveal. So here you are, we're on a podcast, hopefully hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people one day will get to see this. And so you asked me to contribute, but you're putting yourself in the hot seat a little bit. So first of all, I acknowledge your vulnerability. But secondly, I really acknowledge the fact that you could acknowledge what I said, you know, because it's like, yeah, that really kind of hit home. Like, I'm a bit self-conscious, like I'm worried what people think about me. First of all, if you were to say that, there's not one person on the planet who couldn't resonate with that. They're like, well, yeah, of course he does. He's human. I have that. You know, it's like everyone can go, oh, yes, I feel the same. And it's okay. That's the beautiful thing, is that you're a sensitive, caring guy. It's actually kind of it's a form of acknowledgement, really, is that you're that concerned about what people think about you. That's a nice trait. I'm just inviting you to recognize you don't have to be. Just know you're a good guy. Like, because I was that really, really consumed me and defined me for many years, until I realized, you know what? Not everyone's going to love me. It's okay. I know I'm a good guy. I'm doing the best I can. I'm not perfect. My intentions are pure. I want to help people. And if they've got some, you know, issue with me because I remind them of someone, and maybe a guy who, you know, looked like their wife's ex-boyfriend, and that's a trigger. I don't freaking know why they're upset. You know what I mean? But I'm going to let them be me and just know that I'm doing the best I can. And I think there's just a bit of wiggle room there for you, or maybe a lot of wiggle room for you to go, you know what? Rangan, he's a good guy. You know, he's doing podcasts. He has amazing guests who he gives information to people. He's got his radio show. He's got a beautiful family. Like, if you could be more self-accepting, which really what this is about, like I said earlier, the journey is about releasing our own fears. It's not about getting more fame or getting more people to like you. It's like, no, if you have a deep-seated fear that you're self-conscious of, like, oh, you know, and you'll probably remember after this podcast, certain times in your childhood, I would invite you to look, where you did feel self-conscious because mum said something, dad said something, you were in trouble, you were picked on at school, whatever triggered you being, you know, I want to be a good boy, like, because I can imagine you being a very good boy, like, but you don't need to play that role anymore. You know, you're a good guy, you've established yourself, and it allows your system just to relax a little bit more. Let everybody have their opinion. That's okay. Of course, it's nicer if people like us. I get it. But, you know, I don't know what's going on in their day that they're in a shitty mood. But it just will give you more freedom, mate. So it's awesome that you can see it. I'm glad you felt it in your body. That tells me immediately that we're spot on. And now you get to have a bit more compassion for that part of you and go, it's okay. I can see that you developed the habit over time because of your childhood of wanting to make sure you didn't rock the boat, you didn't upset people, and that people fundamentally loved you. That's very human. No one's going to begrudge you that pattern. I just don't want you to live from it anymore, because you can love that part of you just like you would love your child if they felt they were not picked or they weren't liked. It's kind of adorable, right? Because it's a child mentality.
Yeah.
You just don't have to live from it as a grown man. That's all.
Yeah. I mean, as you sort of speak to that, I've done a form of therapy called IFS, Internal Family Systems, which I found incredibly helpful to process various incidents in my childhood. But as you were speaking there, you mentioned ethnicity. I know my brother and I were two of the only sort of non-white kids at our school growing up. Grew up in a very sort of middle class, sort of white suburban area in Cheshire. And I think we were the one, or there was only 2 Indian families in town, and we were one of them. So, there is that self-consciousness there. But there's something you said, Peter, that it's a nice. You didn't say nice quality. It's an endearing quality. But actually, I think it depends where the energy comes from. So, I mentioned my dad died just over 8 years ago.
Yeah.
The reason I live in the northwest of England, where I grew up, is because I moved back from Edinburgh, where I was at med school and working, to help my mum and my brother look after dad, because he had to retire. He had, with ill health, he had lupus. He was on dialysis for 15 years. And, it was a very, very intense and stressful time. Now, I think back to that time and I think, how did I do what I did? And what I mean by that is I would kill myself with caring. Now, I would... I was there 7 days a week. I was working as a doctor. I'd get up at 5. I've shared this before, but I would get up really early. I'd go and shower my dad, get him ready. I'd go to work. I'd sometimes go at lunchtime if he was in hospital. I'd, whatever it needed for 15 years, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, I would do, right? It didn't matter what was going on in my life. That was my top priority. And I remember in the days after dad died, some of my dad's friends would say to me, Ronga, we're just so impressed with you. We've never seen anyone do or look after someone like that before. And that made me feel good on a level. I thought, because I had built up, mate, this identity that's who Rongan Chatterjee is. He looks after people. He cares for people. And what's really interesting is my mum, unfortunately, her health has been deteriorating recently. Her mobility's gone down. My brother and I are around most days. I'm there helping her with breakfast most mornings. And there's a couple of things there. Is I can feel the energy behind me caring for mum very different to with dad. Like, it's no longer my identity. I love my mum. I'll do everything that I can to help her. But I'm not going to kill myself at the same time. I can put boundaries up in a way that I was incapable of doing 8 or 9 years ago. And for me, I'm now starting to think about, actually, I can now see a time when mum won't be around, which is something I've sort of come to terms with in the last few months. And I'm actually, a lot of the time, I'm okay with it. Just to be clear, it doesn't mean I don't love my mum. It doesn't mean that energy is different now, and it feels good. It feels like it doesn't take every sinew, every sort of ounce of energy away from me. I feel like I've still got energy for me and my family, but I can also care for my mum. Does that make sense?
100%. It's why the FAA has the ruling that when you get on any airplane, and many people have heard this before, and the attendant or whatever says the oxygen masks come down, you put yours on first, even before your own child. Now, that's a beautiful metaphor for the fact that if you don't take care of you, you're of no use to anyone anyway. Right? So I would assert that with your dad, you were still trapped in the idea that it was incumbent upon you. It was like, it occurred to you as a have to, I must, I need to. Yes, of course you care. But now with your mom, it's a choice. It doesn't mitigate or doesn't in any way minimize the amount of love that you have for her, but she's on her own karma. we become less attached to form. My mum died when I was 7 of cancer. My dad went to work when I was 17, never came back, right? He died on the ferry in Zeebrugge. And for sure, it impacted my life, but it really taught me the power of being able to let go of form, right? Form, anything in the manifest world. And form comes and goes all the time. Even in the course of this conversation, we both literally lost millions of cells. Anyone listening, they've lost millions of cells. They're dying all the time. And we're not like holding on for dear life, you know, but when it comes to these archetypes, especially of mum or dad or a partner or a child, like we become so attached, and that's human, but it again leaves us very vulnerable versus, you know, where we combine with the essence of something. I feel so grateful that I had a father, even only he was there for 17 years, because the essence of our connection was so beautiful, even though the form, the time we physically had together, was quite short, right? So I invite people to really look at the quality of your life and your relationships and the connections versus the quantity or the attachment to the external trappings, the form of something. So I love the fact that you can even see in your own behavioral adaptation that before the little boy, it's how it defines you. It's no surprise you're a doctor, right? Like there's this part of you that has been programmed somewhat through adaptation to be the care provider, like the wounded healer, right? Like that's where you find your value.
It's these identities we construct around ourselves that we live within. That, you know, the identity I had was that I'm a carer, you know, doesn't matter night or day, 7 days a week, I am there. Nothing gets past me. I'm there, you know, and I'm going to see that, and the world around me are going to see that. And when you let go of that label and you stop living within those constraints, it is freeing. And mate, I've gone through a process of the last few years of just getting rid of really feeling into what are these labels. And I don't define myself as a doctor. I no longer even define myself as a father. I'm proud to be a father. It's a role that I take very seriously. Yeah. But I think the problem is when you define yourselves by these kind of labels, again, you're putting yourself in a box. Part of you then starts to live in accordance with what you think society thinks that label should be, which is problematic in itself. But then what happens? What happens if you lose that label? As you say, what happens if I got fired from my job? What happens if I got ill and I couldn't work? What happens as a parent when your kids leave the house when they're 18, right? If that's your whole identity, it becomes really problematic. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit to identity and how problematic it can be if we select the wrong identity or actually choose any identity, really. But I also want to make sure we touch on, you know, we mentioned the body, you mentioned emotions, stress in the body and disease. I think it's something that doesn't get spoken about enough. It's not something that we as doctors really get any training in at all. This is in the sort of Western medical model. I know you've trained in Ayurvedic medicine, so I wonder if you could speak to some of those issues, please.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, identity, you know, we could call it persona, ego, they're all sort of interchangeable. So it's where we become collapsed with the idea of who we are. Like, you know, it's a sensitive subject, but whatever. I don't mind talking about stuff. So I'm here to break molds, right? So if someone says I'm Christian, you know, and there's millions of Christians around the world, to me, that's a completely inaccurate statement. It's not bad. It's not wrong. It's just inaccurate. No one on the planet is Christian. Somebody may subscribe to the tenets of Christianity, but who they are as a divine being, that baby that they were at one point, didn't even know its own name or its nationality. It certainly wasn't associated with any particular religion. This is an addendum. This is something that got added after the fact. So if you look at even just religion and how it's been, you know, arguably one of the biggest, you know, causes of bloodshed around the world, it's only because somebody believes they're something and then somebody believes they're something and there's this disagreement and then, well, let's fight. So listen, I pull from tenets of all sorts of religion. I think, I talk about the consciousness of Christ and unconditional love. I talk about the freedom of Buddha and that Buddha is within. I can reference a lot of stuff from Hinduism with Krishna and Shivas. And, that you can pull from all of these things. But to your point about labels, as soon as we basically pigeonhole ourselves and say, I am something, it's like you nailed your foot to the floor. So identity becomes it's very delicate because people are very attached to their beliefs, but without knowing that their attachment to their beliefs is also what becomes the actual impediment to them usually creating the life they want. So to you, what we were just talking about, if the belief is that who you are fundamentally you don't fit in and you're not loved because you're of a different ethnicity, you're at this school, it's only you and your brother and one other Indian family that are really of the anomaly to the norm, then you're going to be self-conscious. You have to be. So that would create an identity where now you're like, oh, I don't fit in, which exacerbates the feeling of separation, which is really what creates all suffering. We don't recognize that we're part of the whole. We're all actually interconnected, right? That's a much more spiritual conversation. There is no actual separation. I mean, even in quantum physics, right? We've got entanglement theory, we've got the unified field. It points to the fact that everything is interconnected. So psychologically, when you get that, that's where I live from. It's like everybody loves me and I love everybody. Why wouldn't I if we're all one? Versus in a relationship to myself relative to others, now I'm separate, then I got to do whatever I have to as in a separate identity to feel that I have value, that I fit in, that I'm liked, as long as you're looking through the isolation point of view, the illusion of separation, you have no choice but to try and adapt and manipulate yourself depending on the environment. You might go to your friends and you feel like, oh, somewhat relaxed because I'm accepted here. But then you go on a job interview and now your value systems are being challenged as an identity because you're like, are they going to pick me? Are they going to pick me? Am I going to get the job? And now you're self-conscious. And then you might go to a dinner party and you don't know anyone and you feel like, oh, I don't have the same, I don't go hunting with these people. I don't know anything about hunting, or I don't play lacrosse. Like, will they like me? So all of these systems get challenged because we think we're independent. That's the identity. So it can be very deleterious to our psychological, our mental, and our physical health, to go to your second part of your question, which is where I talk about the term dis-ease a lot, as the precursor to disease that manifests physiologically. When psychologically we're in a state of dis-ease, the absence of ease, then the endocrine system is going to be dumping the cortisols, the norepinephrines, the adrenalines into our body, which if that's consistent over time, then our body can't rejuvenate itself. Things are going to become compromised. And that's where, it might take a couple of decades, but you're going to get sick. So identity, it's so ironic because people fight for their identity, but the identity itself becomes the obstacle to what they want, which is really union. You look at relationships romantically. Here's the irony. You go on your first date and you're really excited, male or female, and you're meeting male or female, who cares what you're into? But you're going to do whatever you can to present your greatest ambassador. Right? Like, so, you put on the shirt that you haven't worn ever, or you even went shopping and got some new shoes, which are really uncomfortable, but they look good. You've actually, shaved for the first time, whether you're male or female, wherever you're shaving, for a couple of weeks. You've put on your best cologne, which is the terrible move. But anyway, and so you've got this sense of like, oh, I'm doing the best I can. And it goes well to the point that you have a second date and maybe, if you gave 90 out of 100 of your best, on the second date, you come down to about 80, 85. And then the third date, you're starting to feel much more comfortable with people and you're down to a 60% of your best. And, maybe a year from now you're married and before you know it, you're like, your worst average every day. And your partner's like, what the hell happened to you? It's like, that wasn't the person I met. Yeah, well, because you were just coming from fear. That's your identity based in inadequacy, insecurity, and scarcity. You had compensation patterns, behavioral adaptations to try and present yourself so that you become the chosen one, that you're accepted by society. As soon as you feel accepted, then you go straight back into your inadequacies, the self-fulfilling prophecy of the fact that no one gives a shit, who cares, what the fuck, I'm powerless, and everything starts to become, back to this like very mediocre average. So identity it's got its plus signs because you try a little bit, but it's also becomes the very precursor to all of the deleterious effects in our life, including the worst, like addictions and self-sabotage and suicides and things that are very real that really affect people. It's all because of identity.
Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this conversation, there's loads more like it on my channel. Please do press subscribe and hit that bell. Now, back to the conversation.
So, yeah, it's a big issue. My work is dissolving identities. As I tell people, I'm not here to help the person. I'm here to get rid of the person.
Is it possible to have an identity that's helpful? So you mentioned religion. So sometimes, of course, people like the identity of a religion because it helps them abide by or follow a certain set of principles that helps them, have better relationships and feel calm. So I guess, is there a bit of nuance there? I mean, your identity to many of us is the mind architect, right? So is that identity, can you envisage a scenario in your life where actually having that identity is limiting? What if someone's got a problem with their body that you help with, but you're the mind architect, you're not the body architect? Do you know what I mean? I'm sort of, how would you think about that?
Well, this seems to be a good platform to announce that I'm now the body architect.
The mind-body architect, the human architect.
I'm the life architect. No, it's a great point. And again, people don't know my inner workings, but for me, it's very clear that I know I'm not the mind architect. I know I'm not Peter Crone. These are all things that they're sort of, adorned on my identity. I know for myself, without sounding too poetic, that I'm just a space of pure love and possibility. That's how I identify with myself. And then how that manifests, my background was just a trainer, and I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner, so that I can pull from those skill sets. But for someone to say that they're a lawyer or they're a doctor or they're an insurance agent, or they're a professional athlete, all of these monikers that we have, they're not wrong, but they're inaccurate to the essence of who we are. So for me, I feel very comfortable using labels without being attached to them. It's like, oh, I'm the mind architect. It's like, no, I couldn't care less. Call me whatever you want. Like, it doesn't really bother me. I'm much more interested in the essence of what people get from the energy of who I am and the words that I share that help them to tap into their equivalent form of freedom that I feel that I embody, which is why people find my work inspiring. They might not know too much about me as a persona. They might not know my parents died. They don't know if I'm married, I have children. They probably couldn't care less. They're much more interested in like, wow, I feel better listening to this guy. So really, what is that? Is it because I'm a mind architect or because I'm representing the expression of a form of energy that is appealing to them? The expression namaste, the divine in me recognizes the divine in you, is the translation, right? So it's really, I'm speaking from a place that I assert is somebody's essence, and it's appealing to the essence in them, whether you call that freedom or love or self-worth. So that identity that I use, yes, can people have an identity that's beneficial? Of course, but to what end? You could argue that your identity of being a doctor, 365 a year, 24/7 with my dad, like you could argue that identity of like, I will not be stopped, I'm a care provider, you could say that's beneficial. You probably helped your dad for a lot, But my question is, to what expense? In real estate, they have that term carrying costs. If a house is not being sold, it's got carrying costs, right? You have to keep the lights on, you keep it clean, you're paying your mortgage, whatever. And so an identity always has carrying costs. And so it's just the degree to what are those costs. Now, again, to the extremes of an identity that's founded in a feeling of inadequacy where I'm not loved, I'm not wanted, I'm a failure because of their childhood that led them to finding relief in substance, and it became an addiction that is now draining their bank accounts. It's ruined their marriage. They don't see their children anymore. They're living on the street. That's a lot of cost to that identity, right? Conversely, somebody who feels that they're not good enough and they became a perfectionist and they go to the gym 6 times a week because they're very conscious of their appearance and they want to make sure they have a perfect body and they really work hard to make sure that their house looks perfect. You could say that looks like it's a much better expression of someone's identity, but I would assert that person has still got a lot of carrying costs because they're working so hard to really try and fundamentally get people to like them and accept them. So even on the surface, you know, the homeless person who's a drug addict, the person who has this picture perfect life, they're kind of ironically being driven internally by the same sense of energy and inadequacy. They just manifest it in different ways. So identity, to me, fundamentally does have to be destructed at some point, or at least seen for what it is, which is a facade and a mask, so that we can reveal what's beneath that, which is the essence of who we all are. And from that place, then I feel you actually live a life that would be, you know, sort of referenced or symbolic of somebody who's in harmony with everything. So that is beneficial to everyone. It's just you're no longer carrying any cost because you're just in harmony with your true nature. And I'd like to think that that's where I live from, that there is the absence of friction. There is the absence of resistance. There is the absence of trying to impress people. You know, that to me is true freedom. I'm no longer trying to prove myself to anybody, and I don't have anything to hide. Does that mean I'm perfect? No, but I found peace with that. Does it mean that everything in my history was immaculate? Not at all. Parents died. I drove my dad's car when I was 15. I knocked down the garden wall. Like, I've done my stupid things. I got drunk. I've done all the things that humans do, but I found peace with myself. And so then there's no longer this external identity effort of like hoping that, you know, I look good enough that you like me. That to me is exhausting, and why people do have these sort of self-medicated substances they rely on, which, as I said, can over time really, to your question, impact people's physical health. And to me, that's why I feel my work has helped so many people who have had sicknesses and diseases, some of which have been chronic, because as soon as they let go of the internal mechanism that creates that dis-ease and they find peace, then their external physiology eventually is given the permission to actually heal itself, and miracles literally do happen.
But there's also kind of a change to our physiology. We're seeing lots of research, aren't we, about transgenerational trauma being passed on.
Right. Yeah.
We see in certain families, if, you know, we see this in, you know, Northern Ireland, Iraq, all kinds of countries where there's been significant trauma in the recent history.
Yeah.
We see that the kids or the grandkids, even though they didn't experience it, they didn't directly experience the trauma, they have imprints of that trauma within them. Their stress response is set differently. So that idea of whispers from the past, I think it works poetically and physiologically.
It does. And you know, you could see this as a smoke detector principle. If you have a smoke detector in your kitchen, it's okay if that smoke detector sometimes alarms when you toast bread, when you burn bread, because it has to alarm when there is a fire. So you accept false alarms. And that's the way you should see anxiety. Most of it is false alarms. If you grow up in a world where there's a lot of danger, where no one is really taking care of you, if you have traumas, severe traumas in your families, then the brain thinks that I'm going to live in a very, very dangerous world. And the sensitivity of the smoke detector rises even more. Not because you are broken, but because your brain is trying to help you to survive.
Well, let's dig deep into that analogy because I like it. I think we've all had that experience of the smoke alarm going off and us getting frustrated, annoyed, irritated. Just if we were to extend that analogy, so the smoke alarm going off is our anxiety, right? So we can either look at the smoke alarm and go, that's irritating, how annoying, I wish I never put it here. So ignore it, see it as a negative, or we could reframe it and go, okay, this is great. Look, slightly frustrating, but it's a good job that it's working. You know, I'll be a bit more careful with, you know, checking the toast, maybe putting the setting down on my toaster, whatever it might be. You're looking at it as a positive thing. Thank God it's working, so that if ever in the middle of the night it goes off, I know it's going to save our lives. Is that almost how you want your patients to approach anxiety? And go, thank God it's working. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think so. And when I hear patients saying things like, okay, so now I get it. The panic attack is just a false alarm that shows I'm functioning normally. I think of a scene in a movie called Wizard of Oz from the late 30s, I think. And in this scene, the protagonist, Dorothy, is afraid of a really powerful wizard. And in the end of this movie, the curtain where the wizard is behind is withdrawn by Dorothy's dogs. And she sees that it's just a phony. It's just a phony who's pulling levers and pushing buttons. And the same thing goes for anxiety. When you realize what it is, you see that it's just, when you realize what kind of buttons and levers that are being pulled in your brain, it becomes less frightening. Yeah. And if you go in therapy, a big part of any therapy is to sort of see yourself at a distance. And that's very, very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to take a helicopter perspective on yourself. But you could use the brain for doing that. You could say, it's just my brain who wants me to be afraid, and so on. So I think this perspective can be therapeutic. But having said all of this, we must remember that anxiety is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
If we could just think, trick anxiety away by think positive things or be happy or choose happiness or anything, then, anxiety would not exist at all. It is extremely powerful because it's going to motivate us to take care of danger. So these are very, 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 very powerful things, and they will not just get easily tricked. So if you suffer from this, you should definitely seek help. There's no point at all in suffering in vain.
So I think first step is you're trying to explain to us and your patients that, look, this is a normal phenomena, okay? Doesn't mean it's easy to deal with. Yes, it can be frustrating. Yes, it can have a massively negative impact on your life currently, but it's your brain doing what it's supposed to do, right? So patients are obviously going to feel better when they hear that, oh, I'm not broken. Okay, there's nothing actually properly wrong with me. Now, the next step is, well, what can I do about it? Now, you said one of the goals of therapy is to try and get that helicopter view. And in the happiness cure, you've got a nice little section on anxiety. There's a nice little box out, 2 brain tricks to combat anxiety. You talk about breathing and writing things down. I wonder if you could explain how they might help here.
Right. Well, first of all, there's a part of your nervous system called the autonomic nervous system, and that is something that you can't control. And that it takes care of the organs in your body, how they work, and so on. And there's 2 parts of this autonomic system. One is called the sympathetic system, and then the parasympathetic system. And these 2 work at the same time. And the parasympathetic system is digestion of food, being calm, at ease. The sympathetic system is stress. That's fight or flight. And it's a balance between this system. You go from digestion to fight or flight, back to digestion, and so on and so forth. And it turns out that your breathing actually affects these systems. When you inhale, you amp up the sympathetic system. So inhaling is fight or flight. Exhaling is digestion, calm. And you could use this by breathing in for 4 seconds and breathing out for 6 seconds. It's longer than one feels normal. And by doing so, you pushes the activity in your autonomic nervous system away from fight and flight. And that is very effective. Breathe in 4 seconds, breathe out 6 seconds. Repeat that a couple of times, and you will. That's very, very efficient. And another thing that you could do is to put words on what you're experiencing and try to be a bit nuanced, not just saying I feel bad, but try to describe it in a more objective way.
In a journal?
In a journal, or say it out loud, or just think it, but try to explain it and see it from the distance, because that activates certain parts in your prefrontal cortex that calms your amygdala. And amygdala is a part of the brain that is very active in detecting threats and has been connecting to anxiety.
I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think many people don't realize the power of slow, intentional breathing. When your out breath is longer than your in breath, you are literally changing your biology. You're changing the signals to your brain, right? We understand it. We've been conditioned by taking a pill that's going to have a big effect. But actually, I think some of us don't realize just how powerful finding a breathing practice that works for you. I mean, my experience has been that, I've been teaching my patients for years something called the 3-4-5 breath, where you breathe in for 3, you hold for 4, and you breathe out for 5, right? Again, similar principle.
Yeah.
But I always say to patients, listen, that's one breath. Anders is talking about the 4-6 breath.
Yeah.
Andrew Weil talks about the 4-7-8 breath. There's box breathing, right? Find a breathing practice that works for you, that you resonate with.
Yeah.
And could you perhaps share some patient stories whereby they had bad anxiety and actually breathing was massively useful?
I've had one guy who said it was incredibly important for him, and he actually learned it from you in your books. Yeah, and he had tried a lot of things, and for him it was very important, he said. But I there's one patient case that I never will forget, and that's a guy in his 20s who came up to me at an airport, and he said that he read a book I wrote about physical activity and the brain, and how physical activity reduces anxiety. And he decided to try running. And he had a very, very, very bad upbringing. He was a child soldier, so he had severe post-traumatic distress. And he had tried everything, and nothing had worked. And he had started drinking, so he had developed a severe alcohol problem as well. And then he started to run. And from running, his anxiety was reduced, and then he could cut down his alcohol intake. And he did not know whether it was the running or the reduced alcohol that in the end was the most important. But he said, if I had not started to run, I could never have cut down my alcohol. And he said that he wished that I had written this book 10 years before. So exercise is incredibly important for mood regulation. And that goes back to the things that we talked earlier, that the brain doesn't create feelings based on sensory input. It creates feeling based on sensory input and the input from your body. So your body's state is incredibly important for when the brain creates your emotional states. And if you exercise, well, then the whole of the body becomes in better shape. And then the brain gets better signals, and that increases the chances that it will create positive feelings instead of negative.
I definitely want to get to exercise and what exactly it does for the brain. Before we do that, though, we've mentioned a couple of times about all these signals that the brain is constantly taking in. And I think you said earlier that the end result of that is a feeling. So all the inputs that it takes in, it creates a feeling in order for us to engage in a certain behavior that's going to help us,
And not necessarily help us now, but help us in the world that we evolved for, because we are still adapted to life as hunters and gatherers. That's a problem. The brain wants us to constantly eat because we're preparing ourselves for a famine that never comes. In our world, we can eat as much as we want. It's never going to be, the grocery store will never be empty. But for almost all prior generations of humans, that was not the case. If they did not eat everything at once, they could die from starvation.
And again, we can use that to help people feel better, right? For hundreds of thousands of years, if there was a lot of food around, we were wired to eat it and store it as fat. Yeah, right? That's why we've got these mechanisms there. It's there to protect us. So if we don't get food for 4 or 5 days, no problem. We've got our fat stores that we can start utilizing as fuel. And I think people feel very bad when they can't resist sugar or crisps or super sweet chocolate or sweets or whatever it might be, without an understanding that, you know, for most of your evolutionary history, for most of your evolutionary past, that would have helped you.
Yeah.
You're wired to do that.
Yeah,
and actually, it's not a moral failing. If we brought your great-grandparents into this food environment, you know what? 60, 70% of them would also be overweight.
Absolutely.
It's not as if they suddenly had an amazing willpower. Yeah. They just weren't exposed to this abundance.
Exactly. That's such a good point, that when you go into the candy section at the store, the stuff that you are confronted with, there's nothing like that in nature. There is nothing that contains as much calories as what you find in the candy section. Candy section is basically super, super, super fruits. And when you taste it, your brain thinks that you have run upon the best tree on the savannah, and it's telling you, eat everything at once. This is jackpot. And so this craving for calories that comes from eons of time in a world where we lived without any calories that worked great then, but that craving does not work at the candy section. So it's not just our character. It's that we had to resist these incredibly strong temptations, and we are constantly have to do that constantly. Our smartphones, that's a super stimuli. Candy is a super stimuli, and so on and so forth. So today's society is so much about resisting things that would have been incredibly good for all previous generations, right? Yeah. And I think that the big mistake we make is that by thinking that if we just follow our instincts, we will be happy. But it's not the case. And if we follow our instincts, we would survive in a world where we aren't anymore. Yeah. They will not be happy in a world where the world that we live in.
I mean, that argument extends to pretty much every single chronic disease we have today. Yeah. Like pretty much all of them, you can make this evolutionary argument. You can make the case that there is a mismatch between our evolutionary biology, our genes, and the environment in which we're living. And that disharmony that comes from that mismatch is at the root of mental health problems, autoimmune problems, allergies, right? I had a lady called Teresa McPhail in here a few weeks ago, and she's written a great book all about allergies and why allergies are on the rise. And she shared with me that 30 to 40% of the adult population around the world are currently allergic to something. By 2030, they estimate that's going to be 50%. So if you take a step back and go, wait a minute, we're basically saying that within a few years, half of humanity are unable on one level to live in harmony with the environment around it. It's pretty profound. And I think it all comes back to this evolutionary mismatch.
Yeah. And I just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Kenya and I lived with a group of hunters and gatherers for a couple of days. And I had read everything about this and I have written about it, but I had never seen it in real life. So this was just extraordinary to be there. This was the Maasais in Kenya. And the Maasai, there are a couple of 100,000 of them, but there was a small group of Maasais who lived completely outside society, no electricity, no running water. They constantly moved, did not stay in the same place more than 6 months. Then they moved their herd around and so on. And they were just fantastic people. They all looked like models of health. I mean, they looked fantastic and they seemed to be feeling great, all of them. And I said to one of them, I said to one of them, how many of you have sleeping problems? And he said, well, we did not sleep last night because there was a lion here that tried to grab grab the cows. And I was like, okay, but if there's a lion in my house, no one would
That's
sleep.
Reasonable, right?
That's reasonable.
That's reasonable.
But apart from that, and he did not even get the question. He was like, well, if there are no predators around, why shouldn't you sleep? And then I asked him, how many of your children have allergies? None. And then I said, in my country, where I come from, 1 in 8 adults are being prescribed medication because they are sad. And then he said, well, you have everything. And I said, yeah, that's probably why. So I'm not trying to romanticize that life because that life is hell in many ways. The child mortality is very, very high. And the women are not treated in any way that is, I mean, that's totally unacceptable by any of our standards. So I'm not saying that we should go back to life on the savannah. That's not possible. But there are definitely some important lessons that we could learn from that. And not just from our mental health. Cardiovascular disease is basically non-existent in these groups. Diabetes type 2, one hasn't even been able to put a number on it because one can't find any cases. And remember, they don't have any healthcare facilities. They don't have anyone who takes care of their blood sugar. They don't have any medicine against hypertension. They don't have any therapists. They don't have any, and so on. They don't have any antidepressant medication. And they seem very healthy anyway.
I wonder what they would think of the idea of therapy.
I think they would find it bizarre that you would need a professional to go to for that because they would get it from their community. They lived very closely to one another and they lived also across generations. So
that's fascinating.
It is.
Did you observe what they ate while you were there?
Yeah, They did not. A lot of it was based on milk and meat, actually.
That's what I've read. You know, I've never had the privilege of spending time with them, but we read that's what they eat, like meat and milk.
And I don't know whether that is good for them or not. And you should definitely not romanticize this too much. But it's so vital. But when I went there, I thought, you know, they might be happy and so on, but they don't know any better. I had that thought in the back of my mind. I felt bad for them in some way. And when I left, I thought, I wonder who, I mean, it's not they don't have the problems, it's we who have the problems. I really felt that sincerely.
Yeah.
So once again, we should not go back to that, but there are definitely some important lessons to be learned from it.
It's really powerful what you just said, because we hear about these tribes, you know, whether it's the Hadza, the Maasai, or you know, any kind of hunter-gatherer tribe who's still living like they used to. And it is easy to romanticize it and not see the negatives, but I don't think we need to. Like, it doesn't need to be black or white. It doesn't need to be, you get to choose. You're either going back to, you know, the savannah, living like hunter-gatherers, or you can live in a Western urban city. Like, those are not the only two choices available.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. We can look at these things and go, well, what is it we can learn? What is it we might be able to take and go, no, you know, many of us like modern comforts, right? And unfortunately, we know when a lot of these tribes, when a lot of these native populations end up moving or urbanizing,
exactly,
or being given access to ultra-processed foods, they get just as sick as the rest of us.
Absolutely. So there's nothing genetic about it.
Exactly. It's an environmental issue. And it is fascinating. You know, we have to acknowledge, if they are not having heart attacks and type 2 diabetes, yet they're eating meat, milk, and from what I understand, blood as well, right? I know you didn't say that, but that's what I've read about.
Yeah, they did.
It's kind of like, well, hold on a minute. There's something in the way that we are scientifically trying to talk about heart disease, that there might be something that we're missing. We may be being too reductionist.
And remember, they don't have any medicines at all. They don't have anyone who's taking care of this. They don't have any primary care physician. And let's take, for instance, exercise. These groups, they don't exercise. They move in their daily lives, and they take about 18,000 steps per day. And I asked them, do you ever go for a run? And they were like, what? You know, why would we do that? But just for fun? They were like, no, of course not. When we don't have to work, we hang out with our children and with our elders and our friends.
It's just that they have to run to hunt sometimes.
Exactly. So they can't make a decision about it. They continuously move because they have to survive. And I thought a lot about, we know that exercise is so incredibly important for our mental well-being, and it also protects against diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And you know, it's just incredibly important. Everyone knows that. So then why isn't it natural for us to go for a run? Then why do we want to be in the couch? Well, the answer is that during almost our entire history, we died from starvation. And that's why we want to eat every calorie that we find. However, how much energy you have in your body is not just dependent on how much food you eat. It's also dependent on how much energy you use. And it costs energy to move. That's why we want to stay in the couch. The brain is telling us, don't waste your valuable energy. Don't go running, because you know there could be a famine soon and you need that energy. And then you might argue that I have extra kilos around my waist. Why do I still want to be in the couch? That's actually very strange. And the answer is that we have never been overweight or obese in human history. Overweight and obesity has been basically non-existent problems during our entire history. But threatening starvation has been a huge problem. Yeah. And there's a lot of defense mechanisms against starvation in our body. And one of them is that when we lose weight, our hunger increases. When we lose weight, the basic metabolism, the amount of energy that we use when we are at rest, goes down. And when we lose weight, the amount of energy that is extracted from the bowels actually increases. And all of these mechanisms are defenses against starvation. But they kick in us even though we are overweight. And that's why it's so difficult for us to lose weight. So, and for some people, it's more difficult than for others, but this is incredibly powerful stuff. And you cannot just say that it's bad character or pull yourselves together. It's not that simple.
Yeah. I think this is such an important message, and it all makes sense through an evolutionary lens. Most things I find that we're struggling with these days completely make sense when you look at our past and our history and what have we evolved to do. And of course, the idea that the Maasai would say to you, why on earth would we just go for a run? Of course, it makes sense, doesn't it? What if you have to conserve energy, why would you go and just blow and burn off a load of energy?
You might as well throw your food into the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. So, of course, that person who's listening right now who struggles to motivate themselves to exercise and would rather open a bag of crisps and sit watching Netflix, it's kind of who we are, right? We've always wanted to make things easy for us. We've always looked for convenience.
Right.
And that is the most convenient thing to do. So again, just as you said at the start, maybe we should be studying people who don't have anxiety in the modern world and going, what's wrong with you? Maybe also it's like, well, why is it that some of us do want to go for runs? And we manage to, even though we're living in an era and an environment of plenty.
Right. But when I'm lying in the couch, and God knows I do that often, and I'm trying to make up excuses to go for a run, I think that, my brain is doing the exactly right thing right now. It's trying to protect me against starvation because it wants to keep me still. And sometimes I think that I'm not going to let any brain or any evolution decide what I'm doing. And then I go for a run. And it doesn't work all the time, but sometimes it actually works. So it is difficult. We are lazy by nature. And how could we get over that? What I think so many of our behaviors are determined by habits. So we should try to make it a habit of exercising. That could be walking to work instead of taking your car. That could be riding your bike to work instead of taking the car or bus. That could be walking in stairs instead of taking the elevator. Find the small stuff that you could make a habit of so that you don't negotiate with yourself too much, because the lazy part of yourself is an incredibly powerful negotiator.
Yeah.
I know that from personal experience. So make a habit out of it and don't blame yourselves if you can't do it all the times. It's not bad characters. We are fighting an incredibly powerful forces in modern society. And those forces are pushing us towards something that doesn't make most of us feel good. The more we learn about this Achilles heels of our brains, the more we could work around these Achilles heels. The more we learn of our biology, the freer we become from our biology.
A lot of people these days are suffering with the effects of stress, the consequences of being chronically stressed and not actually adequately recuperating from that. And everyone's looking for the hack. What can I do to keep my life super, super busy, but what can I do that's going to somehow magically de-stress me? And it's fascinating for me that breathing could well be one of the simplest and one of the most accessible things to all of us, yet it's something that very few of us are actively looking at and actively practicing. Why do you think that is?
I think we've moved ourselves far enough away from inside out understanding that outside in has become our go-to default. I look at my phone for an answer to something, right? I'm on social media for things, for answers to things. I look at heart rate monitors for things. I look, it continues to add up on the outside in, so we're missing there's a big variant in that. Like there's a big variation in that, because to understand how you feel, you have to go in. You have to go to the base layer of what's going on. And at the fundamental layer of all of this is breathing. And so actually taking the time to actually reorganize and feel things. Most people, if we were to introduce some sort of a minor breath practice, like the superventilation stuff we did yesterday, that'll stimulate anybody, right? Anybody's going to feel that. But if we do slow, controlled breathing, a lot of people may have problems with that and not feel that just as quickly. And it's more of a long-term thing. So it's something people have to actually put discipline in, right, to understand it. But that's, and this is where that outside in thing comes. You know, people are so stressed out, and it's like, that's all just a conceptualization. That's just story. That's just a narrative. We are designed to handle stress at very high output. And maybe, and then I'm stealing this from a friend of ours, David Bidler, but maybe it's not that we have a disorder. Maybe it's not that, you know, anxiety and all this stress is actually disorder. Maybe this is just a natural reaction to the amount of stimulus, to the stimulus that we're taking in from the outside and not paying attention to things from the inside. Because when I've met and worked with a lot of high level people, whether athletes, executives, whoever, right? The people that are functioning the highest are shutting out everything else. They're in their environment and what they're in. Like the conversation you and I are having right now. I'm not thinking about the drive that I've got to go do, except right now when I say that, right now I'm distracting myself. And so this is where the context of things starts to happen. And then I start to overload more because I'm in an environment I should be paying attention to, and I'm not feeling what's going on with that and present in that situation. And so breathing is that thing that I can go and bring myself right back and stop a lot of the physiological ramifications of that stuff.
Sure. I mean, we'll get into the mechanics of that shortly. The thing that really resonates with me from what you just said is this whole idea that maybe anxiety or, you know, a whole list of other complaints is an appropriate response to the environment in which we're living. And, you know, as a doctor, this is something I've been wrestling with for a good 5 to 10 years now, that actually, a lot of the time, I think that the body is really smart. The body is clever. The body does what it is meant to do. I spoke to Johan Hari. I don't know if you know Johan. He wrote the book Lost Connections on.
Yeah, I've read.
We had just a phenomenal conversation for about 2 hours on this podcast a few months ago. And again, it's that whole idea that maybe the way we're feeling, this chronic epidemic of lifestyle-driven disease, is actually our body's doing what they should be doing in a very toxic environment. I went on your Art of Breath course yesterday with you and Rob were teaching, and your the other
Danny
and Danny as well, which is fantastic. But I got there slightly rushed. I had to fly in from Santa Rosa to California. And we had a chat when I got there, and it was super interesting that, you know, you consciously have made a decision, from what I understand, to not live in an environment where you will constantly be fighting these stressful inputs around you. You put yourself into an environment of nature, of calm, of peace. Was that intentional?
Yeah. We call that, and I'll give this to Rob Wilson, paying attention. If you're paying attention to what's going on in you, you start to feel the aspects of your environment. That doesn't mean I couldn't live in LA. I 40 years I spent in this LA basin, right? And I was perfectly fine. It's just I got away 3 years ago into nature out in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, and spent a year there, like 7 acres, 30 minutes from a real town, you know, in the forest. And I got to know myself. And I really got to know myself. And I had already started doing work to start to feel what was going on in me. But it wasn't until I actually understood, like, oh, this is why people actually get away or unplug, right? And you can do that in spaces like LA. And I actually had this very conversation at a barbecue we went to after the seminar yesterday with Dr. Tanya Bentley, who runs the foundation that we work with, at her house. And they live up in a canyon in what seems to be not LA.
Yeah.
And her husband and I were having this conversation, and he literally was just like, I don't know how you do it here outside of this. And I'm like, I get it. Like, I get that. And I don't think enough people understand that there's gotta be this is where that hack world has to come in if we're existing in these places. right, is we have to actually start to hack things, and breathing is one of those hacks, because I actually believe that if we were still out there, meaning still out in nature, still trying to survive, right? Like cave people, right? Like we wouldn't even need to be worrying about breathing, because we'd be existing in a natural environment, responding to that natural environment in the way that we should have, right? Versus putting ourselves into places where comfort and convenience and the illusion of safety becomes this very, it encompasses our entire life.
Yeah, for sure. I guess it is in this environment we need to think about breathing. It is in this environment we need to think about physical activity, because I guess, you know, in many environments around the world, in these so-called blue zones where people are living to, you know, 100 plus with very low rates of chronic disease, you know, they're not trying to be physically active. They're not trying to have low stress levels. They're not trying to eat healthy food. Their environment is set up where that is the norm for them. So they don't have to think about, oh, I need to go to the gym to work out, because they're moving every day. They're moving to get their food out of the ground, and they're walking around to see their friends and their family. And so, you know, we have to now think about these tools that we need in this modern environment. Mm-hmm. A lot of people listening to this will probably be thinking, well, you know, it's all very well moving out to nature, but I don't have access to that. And so why the breath really fascinates me, because I've worked in many different areas. I've looked after affluent patients. I've also looked after very deprived patients. Mm-hmm. And I guess breathing is free. Mm. Breathing is accessible to everybody. Mm. And then what that naturally lends itself to is, if you have control over your breath, even if you are living in an inner city where there is a lot of noise around you and there's a lot of inputs that you are constantly having to fight off, well, at least you have a tool like a shield where you can use for your body to help you survive in that environment. Is that fair to say?
Totally fair. It's absolutely fair. That's where this comes in. And it even can come in when when you're on vacation or you're in the middle of nowhere nature, right? Or camping or whatever. But this is absolutely where it does come in. And it's our ability to shift our state, right? To be the ability, because we're not staying focused anymore. Like ADD, I've got anxiety. Well, if you're dealing with anxiety, like you're just not responding to your current environment. You're thinking of an environment outside of your environment, and you know, you're doing a lot of other stuff that's going on versus actually responding to the current thing that's going on, right? And I understand this intimately. Is I'm that type A person who will overwhelm myself and bite off more than I can chew, and figure that out, right? Like, oh, okay, I overshot the mark here. I need to pull back. Like I need to stop with all this stimulus, you know, like I chose not to fly down here this trip because I'm on planes pretty frequently and I'm going boom, boom, boom. And I decided a 5.5 hour drive both ways will allow me to decompress in a way that jumping on an airplane and being back quickly won't.
Yeah.
Right. So it becomes, what's my environment? So I can't exist in a big city or in a city or not in nature. And I just have to manipulate my environment or listen to my environment in a way that allows me to kind of just be in that place. Right. And breathing is that one of those things that literally brings you, it's why every meditation practice has breathing at the foundation. It really brings you right to that focal point.
It's funny that I think back to when I started doing things like, you know, when I started working out when I was like 15 or 16, and, you know, you'd read the magazines or you'd read what you should be doing. And they'd always say, you know, when, you know, like, I don't know, a bench press, let's say, you, on the way back up, exhale. I used to ignore that stuff. I used to just think, what's the exercise? What's the mechanical exercise that I need to do? You know, who cares if you're breathing in on the way in and breathing out on the way back up? And now, with the knowledge I have now, I look back and go, wow, how naive was I? And then you can really expand that across, you know, you mentioned these ancient practices like yoga. Yeah. Yoga has got breathing at the heart of it. Yet many yoga classes I've been to, certainly a few years ago, and the way I see many people around me practicing yoga is they feel it's a physical practice. I want to be able to stretch my hamstrings so that I can get in this position, almost ignoring the breath part of it. And I've really gone like completely 180 on this, in the sense that I actually think that breathing is at the heart. You get that right, then the physical actions that you want actually follow very, very easily. And you had this beautiful phrase, I think I heard you say once, mind is the king of the senses, breath is the king of the mind.
That's BKS Iyengar. That's me quoting.
That's you quoting him.
Yeah.
I mean, that is phenomenal. We can maybe unpack that. But do you feel that in the West today, in the 21st century, when we think about working out, movement, yoga, whatever physical practice it is, going to the gym, CrossFit, have we forgotten about the breath?
I would say by and large, most people participating in yoga practice right now around the world are not participating in the way that it was designed. And that doesn't mean I understand it to its totality, but I've been teaching movement and principles of movement for almost 20 years. And we have come to the realization that the way you move is the way you breathe. And thus controlling the breath controls the way you move. And so yoga nailed this in the beginning and at the foundation with people who actually understand these deep principles, but we all kind of get lost in all these different mediums. And it's not just yoga, like you talk about CrossFit, running, all of these things, we whatever the medium is, we lose sight of what we're trying to do because we get caught up in I'm going to burn some calories. I'm going to get bigger. I'm going to get more flexible. No, those are all byproducts of what this does. And why are we doing this? You know, and it's like you brought up the blue zones. And it's interesting about the blue zones is, you know, in no blue zone is anybody going to the gym. So if you're going to sit there and quote, not you, if people are going to sit there and talk about blue zones and what people in the blue zones eat and do and use that to an advantage, well, you better take the consideration that these people live in nature, basically. Yeah. Like they live far from things and they're doing the work based on a lifestyle that most of us, especially using the blue zones as this idea, are doing. And so commit to something like that. And that's all I've done a little bit. Like I'm not doing that fully in any way, shape or form. I'm manipulating the environment in order to suit for how I live a more qualitative life and feel that life. And I'm not looking for necessary longevity of life. I'm looking for quality of life because I mean, I've experienced things like this is a very big rabbit hole, but you just need an abrupt check in your life to really understand things usually. I mean, most of us, you know, and I mean, a little over a year ago, I thought I broke my neck, woke up on the ground and, you know, I had a massive contusion between C3, C4 that I hit my head going up a ladder playing tag with my nephews and woke up on the ground and I couldn't move. And I was like, oh, something's wrong. And that event altered how I started really, even though I was thinking about life being this fragile, quick thing, it really was, oh, you just don't even know. You don't even know when it's coming. And yet we behave as though, especially the hacker world, we behave like there's so much fear around dying that it's like, yo, embrace death. Everything's a death. And come to the conclusion that what you're feeling is allowing you to really experience life. And that's in essence why breath at the foundation and why these yogis and why these people were talking about this is because it is the center of what it is we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, we're so busy these days, right? Nobody's got time. I really do feel, I've been asked this before, what is the biggest stress in modern society? And my view, and there are multiple ones, my view is it's the erosion of downtime. The fact that we don't have downtime in our lives anymore. Every single minute we look at these damn phones. We get up in the morning, we look at these phones, we stand in line in the coffee shop, and instead of daydreaming and letting our DMN, our default mode network, kick into gear and actually start to solve problems and be creative for us, we're consuming. And you mentioned often we need something abrupt. And, for me, one of the turning points in my life was when my father died, 6.5 years ago. And I used to help, I moved back to where I grew up to help care for my dad for like 10, 15 years. And when my dad died, it forced me to start confronting various things in my life. Was I living the life that I wanted to? Was I simply a mirror reflection of everything I'd grown up around? Or, who was the real me? And I find that as I've gone down that path, and it's a big rabbit hole, but I think it's the most rewarding rabbit hole you'll ever go down, starting to understand myself better. I would have time because Dad wasn't here anymore. All this time that I previously would spend with him, carrying him, showering him, washing him, shaving him, all this kind of stuff. Suddenly with that time, I'd go for a walk. I'd just go and daydream, and I'd start to reflect. And I thought, wow, I've not had time to reflect, to self-reflect on my life, my entire life, but certainly my whole adult life until that point. And once I found that time, once that time was given to me, everything in my life started to come online. I've created a life that I love. I love what I do in my career. I feel very close with my wife and my kids. I feel that I know who I am. And in the last 6 to 12 months, I no longer have a fear of death. And that was quite a long story to try and get to that point. But but it's when you do the internal work, I feel that it leads you to your breath, actually, because after you strip away a few of these layers of the onion, you start to, it takes you to your breath, and you realize, actually, for me, the next level of spiritual growth, if you want to call it, or sort of self-exploration, is to sort of get control of my breath and understand it, and actually start to really start to play around with it and see how it impacts my mood, how it impacts my states. And I get the impression from, as I say, it's been a few months that I've come across your work, and I get the impression that underneath the breath, there's also been a lot of personal growth with you.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It transformed everything about what I've worked on. I mean, I'd been in the self-help stuff for 20 years, like looking at it, reading it, going through, seeing therapists, going to programs, workshops, all this stuff, this guru, that guru, like all of it, like, hey, what can I learn here? And it wasn't really until I invested in this that any of that really made any sense. And now it's like, we joke about it, but I like the real depth of things, like the true depth of it, like looking at the heart of what my reaction is to something, and I think that is like, that's the gateway opening. That is the entire thing, is looking at and understanding. And we were having this conversation offline, but it's like somebody reacting to you online or something, and how it used to affect us before, and I was the same. It used to affect me. And now it's like, I actually understand the behavior, and I can have compassion towards that and understand where somebody's at, because it's not actually being directed at me. This is actually something that is an internal issue in not understanding. And so somebody just doesn't have the tools quite yet to get that. And I think our job to some degree is to, since we've decided to take this exploration on, is to explain what those tools are.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, it's almost, I got that sense from you and your team yesterday at Art of Breath that there's almost a deep sense of obligation there, as you have got this awareness, you've developed your understanding. It's almost like something you have to spread with the world. You have to understand it more. You have to be able to communicate it and reach people, because it is potentially controlling your breath. Controlling your breath is probably the wrong terminology. Having an awareness of your breath, understanding your breath, being able to manipulate your breath for certain situations is arguably one of the most powerful tools we have. Yet most of us we do have access, but we don't feel we've got access to it. And we don't have the knowledge to access it either.
Yeah. I mean, Eckhart totally talks candidly about, like, he just openly will just say, just be aware of your breath. Like, just be conscious of your breath. Like, get awareness of that. He doesn't give anything else up, right? Yeah. Like, he's not like, hey, use this pattern to do there's none of that. Right. And I'm only bringing him up because, here's a guy who's really risen up to the top and some very basic, simple ideas in, this self-help or even spiritual realm. Right. And it's great because I think that just the ability to become aware, but most people can't sit there and be aware of their breath. And this is where practices like Vipassana have come in and done tremendous work to where it's like, hey, you're going to go 10 days, silent meditation, and you're just going to learn to be aware of your breath. And that's it. And, after like 3 days, you've, felt like you've never been through more pain in your entire life. Right. And then all of a sudden you become aware of things as this 10 days comes to a close. Yeah. Right. But I don't think that's actually necessary for everybody, but maybe it is. Like, not everybody should need to go run 100 miles, but I did, and like, I got that experience and I understand that, and just sitting there and being quiet and paying attention to your breath for maybe 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or if you can do 10 minutes, and you can just continue to do that is enough. That'll teach you more than most things will, because and the reason is because your breath is connected to everything we're doing. Like, it is that thing that's connected to what we're doing. So it responds to the environment. And so becoming aware of that literally opens up the doorway of, oh, I'm just not paying attention to my environment right now. Or, if there is a lion in the corridor, like, you should notice your breathing, potentially that's not somewhere where you need to stop and be aware of your breathing, but you'll see in those instances where breaths get hold and then, breaths picks up, right? High, stress situations, so it's just, this becomes a very big opening if you can just be aware of it. Now, the optimization factor comes into where I start learning how to manipulate that to bring myself more present or to downshift myself more.
If you enjoyed that conversation, I think you are really going to enjoy this one about the simple things you can do to improve sleep, energy, and reduce fatigue.
The foundational practice that I truly believe every person should do every day is